മാതാവിൻ പ്രാർത്ഥനയാലും ഹല്ലേലൂയ. Okay, we're going to begin. Let us stand up and start with a Lord's Prayer in Syriac. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Abund besmayo.
Niskada shishmok tise malkusok nehawe sebayonok aikanod bashmayo o khabar o hablan lahmod sunkonan yawmolo washbuklan hawbain wahatohay ay kano do fahanan shbakal hayobain lotalan nasayono ilo fasolan men bishomitul tiloki malkuso wahaylo tishbuhato laolam walminami.
Good, please be seated.
We are now going to be commencing the lamp lighting ceremony. Could I please invite Father Eldos Kangumulil, Father Philip Thomas, Dr. Sebastian Brock, Binoy Varghese, and Nohan Bijay onto the stage. Thank you.
We're going to begin the function with lamp lighting. വെളിവു നിറഞ്ഞോരീശോ നിൻ വെളിവാൽ
കാണുന്നു വെളിവിയടിയാരകില
താരമതാ വെളിവും നീ കാന്ത്യങ്ങളെ നീ താതൻ കതിരേ ശോഭിപ്പിക്കെന്നും വെളിവിൻ കാട്ടിൽ വസിക്കും പുണ്യമിതേ പരിശുദ്ധ വേണ്ട കഷ്ടത വിഞ്ചിൻ ദയുമടിയാ വീഞ്ഞൊഴിക്കാം സൽക്രിയകൾക്കു മന ശുദ്ധ്യ സംഗതി വരണീ ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് വസിക്കും പുണ്യമിതേ പരിശുദ്ധ വേണ്ട കഷ്ടത വിഞ്ചിൻ ദയുമടിയാ Over to you, Mole. Over to you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome all. I hope you all had a chance to settle in. I'd like to start off today with sharing a Bible verse with you all. and it's from 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 12. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Now, JSOSM is all about building our youth. As a part of students' movement, we want to bring together all the youth of our church. And through this, we aim to build and foster relationships, to develop new aspirations, to give direction to the youth who are the future of our church. So that being said, it's so lovely that today we're gathered here for a very, very exciting event. Our speaker, Dr. Sebastian Brock, will be giving us a few talks today with lots of deep insight into Syriac Christianity, its rich and complex history, liturgy, liturgical tradition, language. And Dr. Brock himself has had many, many years of knowledge and experience from extensively researching and studying into these areas. And for those of you that may not know, I'm sure we'll all get to hear more about some of Dr. Brock's truly outstanding works and accomplishments later on. But firstly, I just want to emphasize how truly lucky we are to have Dr. Brock here with us today. Not only first and foremost as a member of our parish here at Oxford, but also just to be blessed with this opportunity to gather here as a community and to learn from his knowledge and from his years of experience. And from this, to really be able to broaden our understanding and our perspectives, and hopefully connect more with our faith in this way. Now, my main responsibility today is to welcome all of you. And first, I'd like to start off by introducing our patriarchal vicar, His Grace Isaac Morostatios Tirimeni, who has been very inspirational to our diocese, and particularly to our youth and students movement. I would like to welcome Tirimeni as a part of this event today. Now, I'd also like to introduce MSOC UK Vice President and our vicar here at Oxford Pali, Eldo Sachin. Eldo Sachin has only been with us for a short while, and yet his contributions to the church, to the youth, to this event in particular, have been so impactful, and he's been so supportive, so motivating. So on behalf of the youth, I'd like to thank you, Eldo Sacha, for all your work, and of course, welcome you to the program today. Next, I'd also like to introduce the director of JSOSM, Liluachin. Unfortunately, he can't make it here today with us, but Liluachin has been working so hard behind the scenes with all the students, with the committee members to plan and prepare for this event. So we'd just like to express our gratitude to Liluachin for all his effort and welcome him as a part of this event today. Now, I'd also like to introduce our parish priest, Filipachin. Filipachin has been here with us for many years, and throughout this time, he's always there to lend us a helping hand, to give us guidance, to give us support. So thank you so much, Filipachin, for your help, and welcome to this event. And of course, it goes without saying, our very special speaker today, Dr. Sebastian Brock. We extend a warm welcome to you. On behalf of JSOSM, this Pali, the youth, we'd like to thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to prepare for this session and give us this session today. Thank you. Next, I'd also like to introduce the MSOC UK Joint Secretary, Mr. Bijoy Elias, who's traveled all the way to Oxford today. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the program. Now, I also want to welcome members of the JSOSM Central Committee. And of course, welcome to our lovely audience. Those of you that have traveled all the way to Oxford today, members of the JSOSM student movement, their family, their friends, and members of the Oxford Parish that are also joining us here today. And of course, those of you online joining us via the live stream, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. Now, I'm sure we all have so much to take away from this event, and I, for one, am really looking forward to hearing all that Dr. Sebastian Brock has to say on these topics. So, I won't keep you for any longer, and all I have to say now is to just everybody get ready, get comfortable, and really make sure to make the most of this truly wonderful opportunity. Thank you. Now, I'd just like to quickly announce for everyone's safety and awareness, the fire exit is on the left-hand side of the hall at the very back, and the fire assembly point is in the car park, so it's just for reference in case of an emergency. And Before we begin, like to invite our Achins to say a few words before we begin. And starting off, I'd like to invite Elder Sachin onto the stage for the felicitations. Thank you.
Shall I stand here? It's okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am not going to have a big speech or lecture or anything. We all looking forward to hear from Professor Sebastian Brock. However, this event is very important, not only for who came today physically and also those who are watching on online today. I am sure this is a section is going to be very beneficial for our student movement, youngsters, and everyone, all children and adults who belongs to the Syrian Orthodox Church. We all are proud of our church. We are very proud of our faith and tradition and liturgy. This is a restarting event of student movement in UK Diocese. We used to have a very active events organized by student movements some while ago. Since COVID, it became slow, though we done some Carol Virin every year organized by student movement. This is another restarting of this student movement. I am so happy to be here and welcome everyone, as Jessica already welcomed to everyone. We're missing one person, that is Reverend Father Lilu Varghese, who is the Vice President of Student Movement. Because he had to travel to India urgently, he lost his brother. So our condolence and prayers to Father Lilu Varghese on behalf of Student Movement and all those who know him. Finally, how to be active in this section and how to be full motivative in this section. Let us focus on what being said today, and especially Professor Sebastian Brock going to have I believe he's not that very strong lessons, rather a bit less way of to communicate, to put some importance on our faith and traditions. Let me conclude with asking a question. The question is like this: why should I be proud of my church, Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church? You may jot down some points. If we have time at the end, we might recall it. What are the main factors which you can boast or proud of this Malangara Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church? Think about it at the end of the section. If you want to raise it, we can do so. Once again, welcome Professor Sebastian Brock to this event and leading these sections. And also I welcome Reverend Father Philip Thomas and our UK Diocesan Joint Secretary Bijoy, and everyone who gathered here. I humbly welcome and have a nice time and enjoy the lectures and lessons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Aldo Sacha. Now we'll be inviting Philip Button onto the stage for a short message. Thank you.
Greetings in the name of the Holy Triune God. It's like a privilege for me to be here, like in front of a legend who is here before us, who has done a lots of things in the history of our church, especially in the, the ancient manuscripts, and I can't express all those things because I don't know anything about that. I have seen some of the, the articles. I know how how much time he has spent on those things. We all are eagerly waiting for that lecture. So I would like to thank Dr. Brock for coming here and being with us. And I wish this is a starting. We can, we have to continue these type of lessons in the future so that we can, as Elder Sachin told us, we have to be proud of our church and the tradition, the liturgy, the faith and the history. We have to know more about the church. And thank you for everyone for coming. I would like to wish you all the very best to get it from Dr. Brock. And thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Philip Pacha. I would now like to invite Mr. Bijoy Elias onto the stage for a short message. Thank you.
എത്രയും സ്നേഹം നിറഞ്ഞ അച്ഛന്മാരെ, ഡോക്ടർ സെബാസ്റ്റ്യൻ ബ്രൂക്ക്, പേരൻസ്, യാക്കോബായ സത്യസുറിയാനി സഭയുടെ വരുംകാല തലമുറയെ, എല്ലാവർക്കും തിരുനാമത്തിൽ സ്നേഹവന്ദനം. ഇപ്പോൾ യാക്കോബായ സഭയുടെ സ്റ്റുഡൻറ് മൂവ്മെൻ്റ് നേതൃത്വത്തിൽ ഒരു ക്ലാസ്സിങ് നടക്കുന്നു. ആദ്യം പിള്ളേരൊക്കെ പറഞ്ഞു ആരെങ്കിലുമൊക്കെ വരുമെന്ന് അതിനെ അറിയില്ലെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു. പക്ഷേ കുറേ അവിടെ നിന്നും പല ഭാഗത്തു നിന്നായിട്ട് കുറേ കുട്ടികൾ ഇതിൽ സംബന്ധിക്കാൻ വന്നത് തന്നെ ഇത് സഭയോടുള്ള പേരൻസിൻ്റെ സ്നേഹത്തെ പ്രതി അവരുടെ മക്കൾ ഈ വിശ്വാസത്തിൽ നിലനിൽക്കണം എന്ന് കരുതി എല്ലാമാണ് ഇവിടെ വരെ ദൂരെ യാത്ര ചെയ്തൊക്കെ മക്കളൊക്കെ വന്നു. അപ്പോൾ ഇതിന് കുറേ പേരുടെ കഷ്ടപ്പാടുകളുണ്ട്. അവരെയെല്ലാം ഇതിൽ സ്നേഹത്തോടെ ഓർക്കുന്നു. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഈ സഭ ഇവിടെ നിലനിൽക്കേണ്ടത്, ഇപ്പോൾ ഞങ്ങളെപ്പോലെയുള്ള പേരൻസ് ഈ പള്ളികളൊക്കെ ആരംഭിച്ചു. ഇനി ഇത് നിലനിൽക്കേണ്ടത് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നിങ്ങളെപ്പോലെയുള്ള അടുത്ത തലമുറയാണ് ഈ സഭ ഇവിടെ നിലനിർത്തേണ്ടത്. നിങ്ങൾ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ യൂത്ത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇപ്പോൾ എക്സാമ്പിൾ പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ സൺഡേ സ്കൂള് വിജയച്ചനൊരു വെളിച്ചം കാണിച്ചു തന്നു. അതിപ്പോൾ നല്ല രീതിയിൽ ഒരു നല്ല ഓർഗനൈസേഷനായിട്ട് ഇപ്പോൾ നമ്മുടെ അഖിലച്ചൻ്റെ നേതൃത്വത്തിൽ പോകുന്നു. അതുപോലെ സ്റ്റുഡൻറ് മൂവ്മെൻ്റ് ആയാലും കുറേ ക്യാമ്പുകളൊക്കെ നടന്നു എൽദോസച്ചൻ്റെ നേതൃത്വത്തിൽ. ഇനി അതുപോലെയുള്ള ക്യാമ്പുകൾ നടക്കണം. ഇത് വരും തലമുറ തമ്മിലുള്ള ഒരു ബന്ധങ്ങളുണ്ടാവണം. ബന്ധങ്ങളാണ് സഭയെ വളർത്തുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ അതുപോലെ ഇപ്പോൾ യൂത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു പ്രോഗ്രാം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, വളരെ നല്ല ഭംഗിയായ ഒരു പ്രോഗ്രാം. അത് നമ്മുടെ അനീഷച്ചൻ നല്ല അടിപൊളിയായിട്ട് ആ പ്രോഗ്രാമൊക്കെ കോർഡിനേറ്റ് ചെയ്തു. അപ്പോൾ അതുപോലെ നിങ്ങളും പരസ്പരം ബന്ധങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാക്കുക, സഭയെ വളർത്തുക. നമ്മൾ ഇങ്ങനൊരു സഭ ഈ UK ഉണ്ട് എന്ന് മറ്റുള്ളവർ അറിയാൻ ഇടയായിത്തീരണം. ദൈവം തിരുനാമം മാത്രം മഹത്വപ്പെടുമാറാകട്ടെ. അന്ത്യോക്യ മലങ്കര ബന്ധം നീണാൽ വാഴട്ടെ.
Thank you so much, Bijoy Uncle. Now I would like to invite Julia Binoy onto the stage for a short introduction biography about Dr. Brock. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Sebastian Brock is a British scholar, university professor, and a specialist in the field of academic studies of classical Syriac language and classical Syriac literature, as well as research around various aspects of cultural history of the Syriac Christianity. He completed his BA degree in Classics and Oriental Languages at the University of Cambridge and became Doctor of Philosophy at the University of Oxford. Dr. Sebastian Brock has also had years of experience as a lecturer in the languages of Hebrew, Aramaic and Syriac at the Universities of Birmingham, Cambridge and Oxford. Since 2003, he has been an Emeritus Reader in Syriac Studies and an Emeritus Fellow of Wolfson College at the University of Oxford. Dr. Sebastian Brog is also one of the main reviewers of the Antioch Bible, a 21st century English translation of the Peshitta, as well as the recipient of several honorary doctorates, including the Medal of St. Ephrem the Syrian by the Syriac Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch and the Leveroom Medal of the British Academy. Dr. Sebastian Brog is acknowledged as one of the foremost academics of the Syriac studies and one of the most prominent scholars in the wider field of Aramaic studies. We are so lucky to have him here today as a beloved member of our parish and to be given this opportunity to learn about the history, liturgy, and traditions of the Syriac Church. I would now like to invite Dr. Sebastian Brog onto the stage for our first lecture in liturgical tradition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm greatly honored by this invitation to speak to you, and it's a great joy to do this for you because, as I think has already been pointed out, your generation is the next generation to carry on the tradition of the Syrian Orthodox Church and the Syriac tradition in general. Now, what I want to do in these two talks is, first of all, the first one will be primarily concerned with the liturgical tradition, and then in the second one, I'll look at the role of Syriac, especially Syriac literature and learning, in a much wider historical background. And how Syriac has contributed to all sorts of fields which most people aren't aware of. So first of all, I often like to start with pointing out that Christianity has come down to us not in just two traditions, the Greek East and the Latin West, but in a third tradition, which I call the Syriac Orient. So that's the Syriac churches and also other Middle Eastern churches who, in the course of the Middle Ages, was very strongly influenced by the Syrian Orthodox Church and the Church of the East too. So in the whole pattern of Christian history, one needs to add this third member, the Syriac Orient. Some years ago, I was giving a lecture in Rome, and I took up a theme that Pope John Paul II had taken up himself about the church breathing in with two lungs. That's, of course, in his understanding, the Greek East and the Latin West. And in this lecture, I pointed out that the church actually had, miraculously, of course, three lungs, and that the third lung was the Syriac tradition. So I will now turn to some of the individual aspects of the Syriac Orient and the Syrian Orthodox tradition within it, which are more or less unique within the Christian tradition as a whole. And an obvious place to start is with the anaphoras, having celebrated the Divine Liturgy this morning in this church. In the early Christian world, there were several centers which were very influential. Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, that's modern Antakya, so Antioch's sort of gone downhill in a way in the modern context, so one doesn't think of it, but it was a very important town and see in the ancient church. And then Edessa, which is very specific to Syriac tradition, and Constantinople and Rome. Constantinople called itself the New Rome. So liturgical tradition in the whole of Christianity draws on one or other, or several at a time, of these liturgical centers which were so influential. Now, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, if you go to an Eastern Orthodox church, you will normally hear the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom used. All these attributions, the names by which the anaphoras corbone are known, are traditional rather than historical. There may be some historical link, but it's not easy to find. But the traditional attribution is St. John Chrysostom. And then if you go in Lent, the period of Lent, you'll hear the different anaphora of St. Basil. Now, in the Syrian Orthodox tradition, as you probably know, the Syrian Orthodox tradition is much the richest in the number of anaphoras that are known. There's something like 80, which is quite an amazing number. And they went on being written, certainly until well into the Middle Ages. And I suppose there's no tradition against them, someone writing a new anaphora, but that hasn't happened yet. But the Syrian Orthodox anaphoral tradition is modeled on a very ancient anaphora of Jerusalem, St. James of Jerusalem, St. Jacob. And this structure of this anaphora is different from the Greek Orthodox anaphoras. And it's very distinctive in many ways. And all the Syriac anaphoras are modeled on this. So the structure is the same, but the wording will differ enormously. So in modern usage, I think about a dozen different anaphoras tend to get used. And Father Eltos was telling me he used Dionysius of Barsalibi this morning, which is rather shorter than the full anaphora of St. James. The other Syriac tradition, the Church of the East, they have what is the oldest anaphora, which is still in current use. It's attributed to the apostles Addai and Mari, and it's very archaic in structure, and it's a very beautiful language, but all these anaphoras have beautiful language. And it was, for a long time, it was very controversial with Western scholars because it didn't have what is called the institution narrative, the narrative part in the service which, as it were, reproduces Christ's words at the Last Supper. Now, very recently, within the last 10 or 15 years, the Vatican has officially recognized the anaphora of Addai and Mari as an authentic anaphora. The Roman Catholic Church for a long time had been rather suspicious of it, and they'd rewritten bits in the Chaldean tradition and the Syro-Malabar tradition in order to make it what they recognized as authentic. But they have now officially recognized the anaphora of Addai and Mari as a genuine anaphora, a valid anaphora. And that actually is a marvelous ecumenical event, although it doesn't directly involve the Syrian Orthodox tradition, but it's something we should take note of. They have two other anaphoras. They're attributed, one to Theodore of Mopsuestia, who was a very famous Bible scholar at the time, and the other is to the very problematic name of Nestorius. Now, when anyone speaks about Nestorian, if they're speaking to me, I say, you must realize that there are three different Nestoriuses. There's the Nestorius that in Syrian Orthodox tradition is a terrible heretic who divided up Christ, made him schizophrenic, as it were. And that would be the view also of the Chalcedonian churches. And then there is the view of the Church of the East, which actually doesn't know very many of his writings, and the few writings that we do have surviving haven't been influential, but their understanding of Nestorius is totally different. And the so-called Nestorian theology is perfectly acceptable if you understand it rightly. And this is the problem with ecumenical relations. In the past, people haven't thought how the opposite side is really meaning. And this is the case with Nestorius. So Nestorius for the Church of the East is quite a different figure from the Nestorius in the Syrian Orthodox tradition. The Maronites, who I haven't mentioned yet, they too have a very ancient anaphora which has links with the anaphora of Ada and Mari, though I don't think they use this anaphora very much. Now, what are the distinctive features of the Syriac and Syrian Orthodox liturgical tradition? I think, for me, much the most important feature is the term rozo. Rozo is very difficult to translate. It's usually translated mystery, and rose in the plural are the divine mysteries, Eucharistic mysteries. But rozo both in the liturgical texts and also in the literary tradition, especially with St. Ephrem in the 4th century, rozo is a very important term because it provides the way of understanding the relationship between the physical world and the heavenly world. When I'm translating Ephrem, who's a very difficult poet to translate, I usually translate rozo not as mystery but as symbol. Now, in modern English, symbol is very different from what it's symbolized. But in the understanding of the Church Fathers and of all early Christian literature, the symbol is ontologically connected with what it symbolizes. There's a direct connection between what is symbolized and the symbol. So it's rather like in the Greek tradition how they understand icons. If you're praying to an icon, you're actually praying through the icon to the saint. So rozo symbol in this sense is the way that Ephrem in particular understands how this world is connected with the divine world, and also connected with past history and future history. So, and also with the underworld, it connects everything. The rose, the symbols are to be found everywhere, both in the biblical text, in scripture, and in nature. In modern terminology, I think one could just say they're pointers. So you see a symbol, just take, for example, a symbol from nature, a bird. The bird should serve as a pointer to the individual soul, a pointer to the heavenly counterpart, as it were. A bird flying, the soul bird is often seen as a symbol of the soul, flying through the air to the heights. And this sort of way of understanding the natural world and the biblical message is how you see everything is somehow connected. And Ephrem speaks of the need for the individual, in order to perceive these symbols, the individual must have what he calls a luminous eye, an eye which doesn't just see the outer physical aspect, but sees the symbolic aspect of everything. So sees the symbol, and once you start seeing the symbol, you are provided with a whole network of interconnections between past, present, and between this world and the next world, the heavenly world. So this use of a symbol is a way of seeing how everything is interconnected. And that is, in fact, what modern science has realized, but not using the language of symbols, that everything is interconnected. The so-called butterfly effect, that you can do something in one part of the world and it'll have an effect somehow or other, somewhere quite different, which you don't expect, of course. So this use of the term roso is very important, and it's especially to be found in the poetry of Ephraim. Ephraim belongs to the 4th century. We think of him essentially as a poet, but he was also a very profound theologian. Today, people would be quite surprised if you said such and such a poet was a theologian. But in the ancient church, this was not so surprising always, but Ephraim was quite exceptional. And I might say a bit more about him in the second talk if I don't run out of time. Now, while I'm talking about Ephraim, if you look in some of the printed and indeed manuscript editions of the Fenkitho, the festal hymnary of the Syrian Orthodox Church, you'll find that practically all the madrushe are attributed to Ephraim. Unfortunately, this isn't quite the case. What happened in the history of the liturgy is very early on, Ephraim's poems were used in the liturgy, but then other people started writing liturgical poetry, so you had to give space for the newcomers. And so what happened is that they took just odd verses of Ephraim's genuine poetry and joined in with much later poems. And so what you get in the present liturgical tradition, in the printed liturgical texts and the manuscripts, is a bit of Ephraim, but it's not the full Ephraim. And that's important to remember. The same thing happens with the Ortho, the supplication prayers at the end of the offices. These are all, or mostly, attributed to Jacob Suruk, another great poet, a bit later than Ephraim. But some of these are genuine, but others are not. These poets wrote in different meters, poetic meters, and if someone writes in the meter of St. Ephraim, quite often that work, in the course of time, gets attributed to St. Ephraim. So that's another way that confusion can be introduced. But one aspect of the poetic tradition, which of course is so very prominent in the Fenkitho, is a very ancient literary genre which Syriac poets took over from ancient Mesopotamia. It's the dialogue poem, where you have two figures arguing. And this was taken over first by St. Ephraim and then by many anonymous poets later. And we have about 50 of these poems in Syriac where you have biblical characters dialoguing. And what happens is that a particular point in the biblical narrative is taken, and then a dramatic point, such as the Annunciation or the killing of Abel by Cain, and then the poet explores what's happening inwardly. It goes into the thoughts of these the characters and puts these thoughts into speech. And so the wonderful dialogues between the angel and Mary, between Mary and Joseph, which is very highly realistic, because Joseph comes back in this poem, comes back home, finds his fiancée pregnant, and of course is absolutely horrified. And it takes poor Mary a long time to convince him but she does, of course, in the end. But these poems are very instructive. They're quite humorous sometimes, and I'm always encouraging people to make use of them. They could be acted out very well in church or in youth groups or something. They could be adapted, they could be shortened because they're quite long sometimes. But anyhow, I do recommend them to you. And I have translations of quite a lot of them. Just if you're interested, just contact me. One other important feature about the Syriac liturgical tradition is that it's the only Christian tradition which has a number of very interesting links with the Jewish background out of which Christianity grew. This is in a number of technical terms, which I shan't bother you with, but it's a feature very prominent in liturgical texts. And this is something which I haven't found in any other liturgical tradition, so it's very specific to the Syriac tradition. Now, in the course of the liturgy, of course, you have biblical readings. Ideally, the biblical text that should be used, I suppose, would be originally the Peshitta, but in a modern context, a translation of the Peshitta into Malayalam or into English. That's probably not very often the case, simply because there's been such a strong influence from other translations. And here one needs to look at the situation in the early church. The Greek translation used in the Orthodox churches, Eastern Orthodox churches, goes back to about the 3rd century before Christ. The Peshitta is a completely independent translation made from the Hebrew round about 200, the 2nd century after Christ. And the Peshitta emerges as a written text about the same time that the first Jewish Aramaic translations appear, that called the Targumim. So it's a phenomenon that Aramaic dialects are being written down and used for biblical translations. Now, this is the Old Testament, which of course is from Hebrew. Now, the vast majority of modern Bibles that you will come across will be translated into English from Hebrew. And this will go back to about 16th, 17th century, and especially in the 20th, 21st century, there have been a huge number of new translations, virtually all from Hebrew. Now, in the Syriac churches, traditionally the Peshitta has been used for the Old Testament elections, and ideally it should be used today in translations made from the Peshitta. In fact, we do have a translation in Malayalam done at the late 20th century by someone who was a student of mine. I had the honor of having him. He went back to having completed the Old Testament from Peshitta, and it's now published. And then for the New Testament and also the Old Testament, you now have the Antioch Bible under the sponsorship of the Gorgias Press in America. And there's a very beautiful New Testament bilingual edition of the whole New Testament, and individual books of the Old Testament bilingual are also available. In due course, the whole Old Testament will become available, but we're working on that at the present. Now, turning to the New Testament, the English translation will go back to the Greek New Testament. Now, the Greek New Testament was translated into Syriac first the Gospels, round about 200. Before that, it would have been transmitted orally. We forget today because we are sort of print-conscious culture. We're used to reading things and not hearing things. But in the early church, oral tradition was very much more important. And so it's only quite a late date that people started translating the Greek New Testament into other languages. So in the 2nd century, it gets into Latin, and it also gets into Syriac. And the Syriac that we have today are the old Syriac Gospels, a small number of manuscripts which preserve this very old translation, which is beautiful Syriac. It's very important for scholars because it's a very early witness to the Greek text, and the texts are living things. They develop over the course of time. The Old Syriac just covers the Gospels, so one wanted the whole New Testament, and round about 400, what we know today as the Peshitta came into being. And that has remained the official church, official biblical text of the Syrian Orthodox Church and all the Syriac churches until today. There were later attempts to, as it were, revise it under Philoxenus of Marburg in the early 6th century. That doesn't survive. And then in the 7th century, early 7th century, we have the Hakloio, which is very literal translation of the Greek. It survives in some liturgical manuscripts in the lectionary, but it's, I think, more difficult for people to understand since it's so close to the Greek. And if you're not used to Greek, it sounds a bit odd. So it's the Peshitta that is the standard Bible, both Old Testament, New Testament, which one should ideally use for lections in the Syriac liturgical tradition. And as I say, this English translation of the Antioch Bible is almost finished, and it will be completed, I think, probably by the end of the year. But the New Testament is already available. So I do commend it to you because it's a good translation, it's very accurate, and the Greek and the Syriac texts are rather different in certain places. Not in a way that makes problems, but just the flavor of the language. Now, one of the things that the Syriac poets like Jacobite and Ephraim are very good at is they explain how to read the Bible. And here I go back to a feature of the Syriac tradition which is, it's not unique to Syriac, but the way it's used is unique, and that's the use of clothing imagery. Something we do every day, putting on, taking off our clothes. Well, the whole of the history of salvation can be told through this imagery. The whole pattern goes like this. Adam and Eve in paradise were clothed in glory or in light. And this is a tradition that goes back to Judaism about the time of Christ. It's very prominent in Syriac texts and all these stages. At the fall of the act of disobedience of God, how Adam and Eve are, as it were, symbols of human and the fallen state of humanity. So the whole fallen state is what we experience. We don't know how it came about, but in the biblical narrative, which is told in a storytelling way, it's Adam and Eve are disobedient to God's instructions. So at the fall, this act of disobedience, they lose the robe of glory. And then, according to this tradition, the whole aim of God throughout the Old Testament period is to try and restore the robe of glory to humanity, but respecting human free will. And this is very important. The aspect of human free will is very prominent in these early Syriac writers. So God respects the gift of free will that he has given to humanity, and Ephraim speaks of God putting on human language in the Old Testament. He puts on words. So it's rather like in the Quran being the word of God. So in Islam, God is incarnated into a book, but in Christianity is into words, at least in the Old Testament, into words, and then in the New Testament, the word of God becomes a human being. So at the incarnation, the term used in the very early texts and Syriac tradition for the incarnation is that the divine word put on, clothed himself in the body. So it's, as it were, the descent first in the Old Testament into human language through the prophets, and then becoming a human being in the incarnation. And then at Christ's baptism in the Jordan, he, of course, is wearing this symbolic robe of glory, and he deposits it in the river Jordan. And in quite a number of early Syriac baptismal texts, you'll find that the baptismal font is actually called the Jordan. So when the water of the font is consecrated, it becomes symbolically the waters of the Jordan, and the person being baptized puts on in potential this robe of glory. Now, in potential is the important word here, because it won't be experienced except through the way that person lives their life. And the robe of glory is only put on in reality, as it were, and in the afterlife, after death, so at judgment. So you see, all the different key aspects in the course of salvation history are told through this imagery of clothing. Now, one very important thing that the early poets, Ephraim and Jacob in particular, say is when you're reading the biblical text, if you read it, approach it in the wrong spirit, in a negative spirit, you're rather sort of casting it aside, it's not interesting, or it's outdated or something like that, it won't speak to you. Both Ephraim and Jacob say, if you want to read and understand and get meaning from the biblical text, you have to approach it in love. So it's a relationship of love. The biblical text is, as it were, a living entity. It's inspired by the Holy Spirit, so it has a living character. And Jacob has a lovely passage where he speaks of the biblical text coming back to the reader and telling that reader that if you don't read me properly, if you don't approach me with love, I'm not going to tell you anything. So it's very important to approach the biblical text with the right attitude, and that attitude is one of love. And then the text will, as it were, reciprocate. So I think this would be a good point to break between my two talks. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Brock, for that first lecture. It was incredibly detailed. I, for one, didn't know that there were so many variations of the Anphoras, which was amazing. Now, before we disperse for our 15-minute break, does anyone have any burning questions that they would like to ask? Okay, I don't think anyone. Oh, Jeffrey? Jeffrey has a question. We can get you a mic.
Hello, Dr. Brock. I was just wondering, what inspired you to learn about our church history and our traditions, especially most of us, for all of us, we've been born into the church and we haven't really, I guess we were wondering why you would choose to learn about this church, I guess, yeah.
It came about in an indirect way. I started off my academic career as someone who was specializing in the Greek Old Testament and very technical aspect of how it was transmitted. So my doctoral thesis was on the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament. I was lucky enough to get my first teaching job, teaching biblical Hebrew and Old Testament history at the University of Birmingham. Now, Birmingham, thanks to the generosity of the Cadbury family, so when you eat Cadbury chocolate, this is where the profits go, or went at one stage. In the early 1900s, there was a very generous member of the Cadbury family who financed a refugee scholar from Iraq, Alphonse Mingana, to go back to Iraq and collect manuscripts. And this was the origin of the Mingana collection of manuscripts in Birmingham. I spent all my spare time that I could browsing amongst these manuscripts, and I suppose you'd say I got hooked. And I found it so interesting. And then I suppose the next stage would be when I got a job in Cambridge, and one of my very dear friends was quite an eminent, he ended up an eminent Coptic theologian, George Bibawi, and he was doing a doctorate and wanted me to translate a Syriac liturgical text, a baptismal text, which was in the British Museum. It's a very archaic one. I did that for him, but that also got me interested in the Syriac baptismal tradition. So I've done a certain amount of editing of texts if I come across a new one, and I did quite recently from Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai they discovered a whole lot of manuscript in a locked up room after a fire in the 1970s. And there was one manuscript with a very archaic baptismal service, which is now I published. So I've had a long interest in baptismal texts, and I suppose through these liturgical texts I got interested in, I went to the Middle East on several occasions. I met people from the Syriac churches, all the Syriac churches, but in some ways, perhaps especially Syrian Orthodox, and my closest connection there would have been with the monastery of Mar Gabriel in southeast Turkey. My wife and I went on our honeymoon just after we got married. We went on a huge, great tour of the Middle East, and we stayed in Mar Gabriel Monastery, and it made a great impression on me. And I made great friends with the Malfoni there and with the bishop, and so that friendship has continued. That's over half a century ago now. And over the course of time, I met more and more people from the different churches, and I was I've been very influenced by my friendship with Mark Gregorius, the bishop who was kidnapped. We worked together at Pro Oriente on ecumenical matters in the 90s, and I hugely admire what he has done. No one knows what has happened to him, whether he's still alive or not. There's great tragedy for the Syrian Orthodox Church. So, and then I suppose most immediately, I knew Bishop Julius Cicek quite well in Holland, who was the predecessor of Mar Polycarpos. He was the first bishop of called Central Europe, and he did a huge amount organizing parishes in Holland, Germany, Belgium, and at one point he wanted to have a, well, I don't quite know, sort of a documentary, I think he'd probably call it, about the Syrian Orthodox tradition, accompanied by written volumes. Well, in the end we did produce one, and it's called The Hidden Pearl. It's a documentary done by Transworld Films in Rome, and they went to enormous efforts to go wherever I told them they should go. They went to India, Kerala, they went to the Middle East, and there's some wonderful photographs in this, in the 3 volumes, and the documentary, if you ever have a chance of seeing it, would be worth seeing. I think they did it very well. And so I worked very closely with Bishop Cicek in the writing of the volumes, and he obviously was interested in what I'd written, make sure that it was all right. And so that was, I suppose, a very important part of my sort of growth. And eventually, only last year, what I'd sort of hesitated about for many years, I decided I really should become Syrian Orthodox myself, so I was received in Holland.
Thank you, Dr. Brock, for answering that with such clarity. An amazing question, Jeff. We will now be dispersing for our 15-minute break. Refreshments and drinks will be served, so if you guys can have a little stretch around and meet back in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Andrea and I'm the Joint Secretary for JSOSM UK, and if you're seeing this video, it means we're taking a small break during our live stream. But I wanted to use this time just to talk about JSOSM and what we've achieved in the past year. So around a year ago, we elected this committee under the provision of Orthodox, who always encourages us to interact with our youth as much as we can. And so when we formed this committee, we were tasked with making individual videos explaining who we are and our role within JSOSM. However, we have lots of unreleased footage from making those videos that you guys haven't seen yet. So make a chaya, sit back and watch JSOSM behind the scenes. I'd like to talk about it.
Oh my goodness.
For all those what, where am I going off screen?
For grace and the Holy Spirit provoking me what? Provoking me.
Hi, my name is Roman Odo, and I'm a member of...
My name is Stephen Daniel, and I'm Zone Coordinator for Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. In the summer of 2024, we filmed our very own JSOSM short film competition for all our units. We also made a short film advert, and here are the bloopers airing now.
And the theme for this year's exciting opportunity is from Psalms 23 verses 4. For even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil. For you are with me.
Each entry will be judged by the following criteria.
To partake in this competition,
winner being announced as green at this year's competition.
How do I even do this?
I can't do this anymore.
It's just life, bro. You have to get over it.
Even in the darkest moments, you're never alone. There's always a light somewhere.
What's wrong?
I think he's kind of lost. Have you heard of the Bible? Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23, verse 4.
God bless you. God bless you. Bless you. Bless you. Bless you. Bless you. I bless you too.
These words have healed me. God is always with me. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
I bless you.
Life is filled with various trials, troubles, and tribulations.
There are moments in life when the path ahead of us seems uncertain.
It is easy to slip from God's plan and feel overwhelmed, to let fear and doubt take hold.
But in these moments, the words of Psalm 23 echo through our minds, holding a powerful truth.
Despite the countless hardships we face today,
peer pressure, pride, fear, and anxiety, even in our darkest moments, we are not alone.
God is with us every step of the way.
From the beauty and intricacy of the world to the silence and solitude of prayer, our strength comes from the Lord Almighty.
Together, with Him we move forward, stronger, wiser, and full of hope.
Lord God, we come before you with humble hearts. We ask for your guidance. Be with Chris tomorrow as he receives his results, no matter what the outcome. Amen.
കിട്ടി ഓ ദൈവത്തിന് സ്തുതി നമ്മുടെ പ്രാർത്ഥന ദൈവം കേട്ടു.
What are you doing? Sorry, bro. I'm sorry. What are you doing?
Thanks for coming. Of course. You don't know it.
Trust in me, and you'll find peace and strength. For it is written, trust in the Lord with all your heart.
നാളായിടാ മറ്റവരൊക്കെ എവിടെയാടാ
അവരിന്ന് വരും പറഞ്ഞ
ഇന്ന് വരുന്നവർ കുറെ സാധനം വരും. ഞാൻ അവിടെ വിളിക്കട്ടെ, അവിടെ പോയി തൊലയാടാ. നിങ്ങളൊക്കെ എന്നെ എവിടെയാ? ഞാൻ എത്ര നോക്കി ചെയ്യണേ. എനിക്ക് വിശക്കണല്ലോ, നമുക്ക് എവിടെയും പോയി കഴിക്കാലോ.
എന്നല്ല എന്തായാലും ഉണ്ടടാ പൈസ, നോക്കടാ.
എടാ നിന്റെ പൈസ ആയാലേ നിനക്ക് വയ്ക്കാൻ പറ്റും. ആ ദൈവത്തിന്റെ പൈസയാടാ.
ഞാൻ ചോറ് നീർ കൊടുത്ത് ഉണ്ടാക്കിയ പൈസ.
എടാ അത് കുഴപ്പമില്ലാടാ, നമുക്കത് എവിടെയെങ്കിലും കിട്ടാന്നേ.
പൈസ പോയടാ.
അത് പൈസ പോയിക്കോട്ടെ, നമുക്കത് ഫുഡ് കഴിക്കാൻ പോടാ.
Don't say that. He won't give me nothing.
Just believe, bro. Just
believe in what?
Believe in God.
Yo, no, I lost everything.
Bro, it'll
everything.
come back.
I mean,
it'll come
everything.
back. Trust me. Just believe in God.
Oh, huh? What's that there?
What do you mean?
Who are they? Do you not see that, bro?
What?
Bro, do you not see that? No,
what?
no.
Listen,
what is this? No,
bro. എടാ എണീക്കടാ. സൂക്ഷിനാഥേ, നിന്റെ നാം വിശ്രാമേ, നിന്റെ രാജ്യം വരണമേ, നിന്റെ ചിന്തകളെ പോലെ മുമ്പിലാണമേ. ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് ആവശ്യമുള്ള ആഹാരം നിൽക്കണമേ. ഞങ്ങളുടെ കർക്കാട് ഞാൻ ക്ഷണിച്ച പോലെ ഞങ്ങളുടെ കള്ളം പാലും നീ ക്ഷമിക്കണമേ. പരീക്ഷയ്ക്ക് രക്ഷിക്കരുത്, പിന്നെയോ ദർശനം രക്ഷിക്കണമേ. എന്തെന്നാ രാജ്യവും ശക്തി മഹത്വം എന്നേക്കും ക്ലാമേ. ആമീൻ. കണ്ണു ഓർക്കടാ.
നാട്ടിലെ പാവനി മേരി മാതേ, യേശയ്യാവിൻ മൊഴി ഭൂമിയിൽ മാറിപ്പൂവാ.
പോരിടോൾ താഴ്വരയിൽ കൂടെ നടന്നാലും ഞാൻ ഒരു അനർത്ഥവും ഭയപ്പെടുകയില്ല. നീ എന്നോട് കൂടി ഇരിക്കുന്നുവല്ലോ, നിന്റെ വടിയും കോലും എന്നെ ആശ്വസിപ്പിക്കുന്നു.
Maria and I have been best friends for as long as I can remember, and she had come over for our weekly catch-up.
Thank you for the chaya.
No worries. How's the job hunt going?
It's been okay, you know. I've applied to a few jobs, so the job market right now is quite down. I think I might get the job. How's it been with you?
Yeah, I've been doing really good. I've just moved here, and I've just moved to a really nice valley in Watford.
Yeah. I didn't get the job. Oh. I don't know what to do.
After the rejection, I knew I couldn't give up, so I continued to prepare for my next interview.
Hi, my name is Maria Paul. I'm 21 years old, and I'm here for a job interview for the role of receptionist at your company.
I thought the interview had gone well, but it was another rejection. I decided to go to church to pray for strength and guidance for my next interviews. I was getting rejected left, right and centre. Just when things couldn't get any worse, I received a text from my landlord. I thought I had lost all hope when I had been asked to move out of my apartment, but Anna was so kind to let me stay with her.
Maria, come on, let's pray.
Psalms 23. Hey Maria, I know the last interview didn't go so well, but we can go out for some dinner, take your mind off things. Obviously, I'll pay for it, so don't worry. What do you think?
It's okay. I don't want to be a burden for you. Go out and eat. I'll probably eat something for you.
Okay, definitely can change your mind.
Slowly, over time, I pulled away and no longer attended Mass or joined Anna for morning and evening prayers.
Look, I know things have been hard on you recently, but shutting yourself out is doing no good at all. Tomorrow is Mother Religion and Abdullah, and I would really love for you to come with me to church tomorrow and gain some clarity, and to remind you God is with you at all times, especially during the darkest times.
You're right. I'll come with you to church tomorrow.
My worries had piled up and I had been feeling overwhelmed, so after the Mass I decided to seek guidance from our priest.
Hi, my name is Maria Poole. I'm 21 years old and I'm here for an interview for the role of receptionist at your company. Here's your chaya. Thank you. How was the interview? It went so well. I'm feeling so optimistic about it. Really? Yeah. Okay.
I believe in you, you know. I know you'll get in, and I know God is with you.
Maria's story demonstrates how even during the most challenging times, God is always with us. As it says in Psalms chapter 23 verse 4, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me."
If there is one thing you should take from this woman, it's that during our struggles, faith is a quiet strength, supported by loved ones and the comforting presence of God.
നാമത്തിന്റെ മഹത്വം ഉണ്ടായിരിക്കട്ടെ. പരിശുദ്ധ യാക്കോബായ സുറിയാനി സഭയുടെ UK ഭദ്രാസനത്തിന്റെ കീഴിലുള്ള സ്റ്റുഡൻറ് മൂവ്മെന്റിന്റെ ആഭിമുഖ്യത്തിൽ നടത്തപ്പെട്ടതായ ഷോർട്ട് ഫിലിം കോമ്പറ്റീഷൻ അത് ഏറെ മനോഹരമായിട്ട് നടത്തപ്പെട്ടുവല്ലോ. അതിൻ്റെ ഔദ്യോഗികമായിരിക്കുന്ന ഫലപ്രഖ്യാപനം ഇപ്പോൾ നിങ്ങളെ ഏവരെയും അറിയിക്കുകയാണ്. മനോഹരമായിരിക്കുന്ന 5 ഷോർട്ട് ഫിലിമുകളാണ് എനിക്ക് അയച്ചു തന്നത്. അതിൽ നിന്ന് 1ഉം 2ഉം സ്ഥാനക്കാരെ തിരഞ്ഞെടുക്കുക എന്നുള്ളതാണ് എൻ്റെ ദൗത്യം. 2ാം സ്ഥാനത്ത് എത്തിയിരിക്കുന്നത് പീറ്റർബ്രോ സെന്റ് ഗ്രിഗോറിയോസ് യാക്കോബായ സുറിയാനി ഇടവകയാണ്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഏറ്റവും നല്ല രീതിയിൽ ക്രമീകരിച്ച് 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്ത് എത്തിയിരിക്കുന്നത് വാട്ട്ഫോർഡ് സെന്റ് ഗ്രിഗോറിയോസ് ജാക്കോബൈറ്റ് സിറിയൻ ഓർത്തഡോക്സ് ചർച്ചിലെ സ്റ്റുഡൻറ് മൂവ്മെന്റിന്റെ അംഗങ്ങളാണ്. ഈ 2 ടീമിനെയും പ്രത്യേകമായിട്ട് അഭിനന്ദിക്കുന്നതിനോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ മനോഹരമായിട്ട് ആ ടീമിൽ നിന്നുകൊണ്ട് എല്ലാ കാര്യങ്ങളും ക്രമീകരിച്ച് നല്ലൊരു ഷോർട്ട് ഫിലിം തയ്യാറാക്കിയ മറ്റ് 3 ഇടവകയിലെ സ്റ്റുഡൻറ് മൂവ്മെന്റ് അംഗങ്ങളെയും പ്രത്യേകമായിട്ട് അഭിനന്ദിക്കുന്നു. എനിക്ക് ഈ ഒരു ദൗത്യം എന്നെ പരമേൽപ്പിച്ചതായ സ്റ്റുഡൻറ് മൂവ്മെന്റിന്റെ വൈസ് പ്രസിഡന്റ് ആയിരിക്കുന്ന പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട എൽദോസ് വട്ടപ്രവലച്ചനോടും സ്റ്റുഡൻറ് മൂവ്മെന്റിന്റെ മറ്റ് ഭാരവാഹികളോടുമുള്ള നന്ദിയും സ്നേഹവും പ്രത്യേകമായിട്ട് അറിയിച്ച് വാക്കുകളെ നിർത്തുന്നു. ദൈവം നമ്മെ അനുഗ്രഹിക്കട്ടെ.
Hey guys, it's Nohan from JSOSM here. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you who helped bring our JSOSM Gathered Within the Food Store come to life. This includes all of you who helped us with the planning of the event beforehand, helped us set up on the day, and helped us with the selling of the items on the day. But also to all of you who came to our food stall on the day and purchased our items, helping us raise the massive fund that we were able to for JSOSM on that day. It's all thanks to everyone who's helped hard work, but also all of you guys who participated in, again, this fundraising for our JSOSM community. Hopefully, with this fund, we can start to develop some more events and some camps, retreats, talks for all our JSOSM students in the future. Again, this coming weekend, we have a Oxford talk led by Dr. Sebastian for our JSOSM students, and we hope to do more events like these throughout the year and every year from now on. Anyway, hope to see you guys all at our next event, and thank you guys so much for the amount of hard work that you put in for our JSOSM Gathered Within the Food Store. Thank you everyone. Love from JSOSM.
Look at that.
കന്യകമറിയാമിന്നാം പെറ്റാളുണ്ണിയെ മകുടങ്ങളെ മുടയും നോനെ സിയോനിതു കേട്ടപ്പോൾ അവനെ കണ്ടിടും മുമ്പേ കമ്പം പൂണ്ടു നിബിമൊഴിവായി നൃപതി ജനിച്ചെന്നാൽ കൊല്ലിച്ചാലാൾ വിട്ടാം വേദലഹേം ശിശുവൃന്ദത്തെ വീഴ്ചയിലായി തൻ വാഴ്ച പാടാനീശോ എന്നെന്നും വരുവിൻ സ്തുതി പാടിടാം നിജജനനത്തിൻ ദിവസത്തിൽ ഹാലേലുയ്യ ഹാലേലുയ്യ ബാരക്കുമോ. തന്നിൽ മുതിർന്നോനെ അമ്മണിയുണ്ടേ ജനഗണു സമനോണം ഉൾക്കൂട്ടിൽ പാൽ നുകരുന്നു മാലാഖമാ ചൂടുന്നു ഇടയന്മാരും ശാസ്ത്രികളും രാജാധീശക്കെന്നവിധം ഹാലേലുയ്യ ഹാലേലുയ്യ.
is just one of the early interpretations, but that only is found in the Syriac tradition. So something unique. So my second talk is going to look at Syriac literature or aspects of Syriac literature from a wider context of, well, not world literature, but at least ancient literature that we are aware of from the Greek world, from the Middle Eastern world. I'd start off with something that actually starts in India, and that is animal stories. Now, you as children may well be very familiar with some of these stories, and I, as a child, read them with great pleasure in rather altered form, no doubt, over the course of space and time. But these were originally written in Sanskrit or Prakrit, and they arrived in the Middle East in about the 6th century AD, and they first got translated from Indian language into a Middle Eastern language, into what is known as Middle Persian. And it was from Middle Persian that a Syriac translation was made in the 6th century. And this is the oldest surviving form of these animal tales in any language outside India. So from an academic point of view and cultural point of view, this 6th century translation is of great interest. Now, the collection grew with time, and by the 9th century, someone also translated from Middle Persian into Arabic. And that Arabic was translated into Syriac. So we've got two forms of these animal tales, either known as Bidpai or Kalila and Dimna. And it was from the 9th century Arabic translation that eventually these tales became extremely popular and famous in Europe in the 16th and 17th century. And if you trace the history of the different translations through Turkish, through Persian, and so on, to European languages, it's an amazing network of different translations. I think they're still worth reading. They're wonderful tales, but they don't have quite the popularity today that they had in the 17th century in Europe. So that's a case where we start off in India. A field which in the history of the European intellectual world is extremely important is that of philosophy, and especially the philosophy that was handed down from the Greek world. By the time of late antiquity, which means roughly the 6th century, Greek philosophy was focused primarily on Aristotle. But Aristotle read through the eyes of Plato, and that is what is known as the Neoplatonist tradition. Now, this late antique understanding of Greek philosophy got into Syriac in the 6th century. There was a name of the translator is known. He's called Sergius of Rashina. And he translated quite a number of texts of Aristotle, especially the ones on logic, which was the beginning of the academic syllabus. And he also added his own commentary and introduction to them. So he's not just translating, he's also actively developing the philosophical tradition. Now, in the course of the 6th and 7th century, Syriac scholars translated quite a lot of these texts. They extended it beyond the logical text to quite a number of other texts. And then in the 9th century, we have a very famous movement known as the translation movement in the Abbasid, under the Abbasid caliphs. This involved the transference of Greek knowledge, practical knowledge, to Arabic. The Abbasids want to have the advantage of all that was useful in Greek philosophy and science. And so they had this huge program known as the translation movement. And at the beginning, but also right through the period, but especially at the beginning, they had to make use of translators from the Syriac churches, because only these translators had the experience of translating these texts into Syriac. And they worked from Greek into Syriac and then into Arabic. And because Syriac and Arabic are related Semitic languages, once you've got to the Syriac stage, it's easier to put it into Arabic. Eventually, the Arabs learnt how to do it directly from Greek into Arabic, but that wasn't for a period. So right at the beginning, it was without these Syriac translators and translations, this would never have happened. And had this never happened, the whole of intellectual history of Europe would be quite different. Because what happened subsequently is that through Arabic, this literature got back into Latin in Spain in the 12th and 13th centuries. And this was a great stimulus to thought in the Western European world. It produced what's known as the scholastic movement. And it also has a very important consequence from both an ecumenical and an interfaith point of view, in that the way that this philosophical tradition had been developed, first in the Syriac world and then in the Arabic world, by the time it got into Latin, it was the common, as it were, common intellectual property of the Syriac tradition, of the Muslim tradition in Arabic, and of the Latin tradition. And that explains why Muslim writers of this period were so important for Latin writers in translation. And also they were important for Syriac writers, in particular for one great man, Bar Ebroio. Bar Ebroio died in 1286, so he belongs rather to the end of this, what's known as the Syriac Renaissance. He was a true polymath. He was immensely learned. He wrote on philosophy, on medicine, on astrology, astronomy, astrology, on theology, and on many scientific subjects, but incorporated into his great theological encyclopedia. And his theological encyclopedia was very similar in structure and the way he argumented to the theological summa of the great Latin theologian of the Catholic Church, Thomas Aquinas. So Thomas Aquinas and Bar Ebroio were more or less contemporaries. They didn't know each other, but what they're saying is very similar. The way they say it and the way they put the structure of their arguments is almost identical. So this brings, makes possible, as it were, dialogue between the two, the European and the Middle Eastern tradition. And that fact is very important in modern, both in ecumenical and interfaith discussions. Now, philosophy wasn't the only thing that got translated, mathematics, scientific things, and so on. But another very important sphere, discipline, is medicine. Now, by late antiquity, the 6th century, Greek medicine was almost entirely following the school of a man called Galen, who belongs to around the 1st century AD. He was immensely influential, and so it's not surprising that he was the first medical Greek writer to get translated into Syriac. And it's the same man, Sergius of Rhoshina, who does this. And we know this from a letter by another very famous translator, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, in the 9th century. He has a letter about all his translations of medical works from Syriac into, he did it both into Syriac and then into Arabic. And he lists all his predecessors. He's actually a bit dismissive about poor Sergius, but then Sergius was a pioneer. No one else had undertaken this before him. And this medical tradition was, like the philosophical tradition, was extremely influential with Muslim medical scholars. And like the philosophical tradition, it got translated into Latin in the 12th, 13th century. And one of the standard medical textbooks, right up to probably the end of the 16th century, probably well into the 17th century, was a textbook attributed to a man called Ioannitius. Now, Ioannitius was in fact Hunayn ibn Ishaq. So a Syriac scholar, he actually belonged to the Church of the East, but he did a great service to the Syrian Orthodox Church in that he also translated the Syro-Hexapla, a Syriac translation of the Old Testament Greek. He translated that into Arabic. Hunayn's introductory textbook to medicine goes on being used in Europe right into the end of the 16th and maybe into the 17th century. So an amazing case of influence of a Syriac medical writer. Now, in fact, at the moment, currently, there's great interest amongst scholars in this Syriac medical tradition, and very recently, work has been done on a manuscript in private hands, which was recopied in the 9th or 10th century with the liturgical text, but the scribe of that text rubbed out the original text, washed it out. But with modern technology, you can read a high proportion of the original text. And this is one of Sergius's translations of a work by Galen. And the excitement that this has caused will certainly lead to a renewed interest in Syriac medicine. I mean, it already has, but I hope it will continue and produce other things as well, because there's lots of material available in manuscript. Now, if you read a history of medicine from antiquity to the Middle Ages, it will take you across this path from Greek to Syriac to Arabic to Latin. But there's actually another strand which has been largely neglected until quite recently, and that is of indigenous Middle Eastern traditions, and also further east from India. And it's now realized that a lot of ancient Mesopotamian medicine, which has traditionally been called folk medicine, has been preserved in Syriac. There's a big book called the Book of Medicines, and this contains not only translations of Galen, but also Syriac forms of this indigenous Middle Eastern medical history. pharmacology largely. And that is a tradition that, with the study of ancient Mesopotamian medicine, will one day, people will realize that that too gets transmitted through Syriac. But then there's yet another tradition, and that is of what I suppose you call an Iranian tradition, that's Persian. This doesn't actually survive, but it must have been how Indian medical texts reached Syriac. And we know that they did reach Syriac from various sources. We don't actually have the text, but we have secondary sources saying this was the case. And so it's now recognized that Sanskrit medical texts reached the Middle East through Middle Persian and then into Syriac and then into Arabic. So medical history has a very important element in the Syriac tradition. And I hope this will get studied more in the future, because on the whole, very little work has been done so far. There's quite a lot of texts which are simply unedited, are sitting in manuscripts, waiting for people to come along. So in those three fields, the animal stories, philosophy, medicine, I tried to illustrate how Syriac actually plays a very important role in how all these traditions have reached us today in Western Europe. So I'm going to turn now to a few major Syriac writers who great names, just to draw them to your attention. I've already mentioned Ephraim, but I'll say a bit more about him. We don't know very much about his life, and unfortunately the one biography that we have was written in the 6th century, and he died in 373, so that's 2 centuries and a bit after. Now, in the course of 2 centuries and a bit, a lot can happen, and we can trace what has happened through some Greek texts. But basically, the life of Ephraim that we have is presenting him to readers of the time as they would expect to be presented with a writer who was a religious writer. So he is represented as a monk, which he certainly wasn't, and you can see this in the iconographical traditions. There are lots of icons of St. Ephraim, and there are two traditions. One portrays him as a monk, and I think that's usually been taken over in Syriac icons of him, but the other, which is historically correct, portrays him as a deacon. And we know that he was a deacon from the writings of Jerome, a Latin writer, at the end of the 4th century, writing about 2 decades after Ephraim, so he's likely to be correct. He knows translations of Ephraim into Greek and Latin, which don't survive, but he also knows Ephraim was a deacon. And so I think the iconographical tradition, if you want to be historically correct, should portray him as a deacon. Now, one thing that the life does bring out quite strongly, but also this is to be found in a poem by Jacobus Roque, who died in 521, so again, quite a long time after Ephraim. But Jacob portrays Ephraim, as he says, as the Moses for the female sex, because Ephraim taught women to sing in choirs, and he taught them to be malphoniotho, to be teachers. So this is a tradition which is already strong in Jacobus Roque, and it's been taken up very much, especially in America, where it's interesting in having women teachers in the Syrian Orthodox tradition, and indeed in Europe too. I know quite a number of Malphorn Yotho in Europe, and so this is a very important aspect which goes back to the life of Ephraim, but above all to Jacobus poem on Ephraim. It's a sort of eulogy of Ephraim. Now, to go back to Ephraim, Ephraim himself is remarkably favorable to women, and some of his poems are written in the voice of women singers. His poems were probably sung. And so it's the poems are, as it were, the female singers speaking to the congregation or audience. And in his interpretation of many biblical passages, he goes out of his way to bring out the role of women in the biblical text in some rather surprising places. I'll just give you two examples. In the book of Genesis, chapter 38, there is from the modern point of view, the rather dubious episode where Tamar, a daughter-in-law of Jacob, seduces her father-in-law. Now this was considered so shocking even in antiquity that it was never read in church or in synagogue. But if you read, in this case, both Jacob and Ephraim, Jacob at great length, but Ephraim here and there, he gives a very good reason for Tamar's unconventional, to say the least, action. He points out that there was great expectation for the Messiah, and that the Messiah was known to be coming from a particular family tree. And Tamar had indeed married into that family tree originally, but she'd had at least two husbands from that tree, from that family, but they died. And she'd been really rejected by the family itself after that. And she was so anxious to belong to the ancestry of the Messiah, that she took this unconventional way of persuading her father-in-law to produce a member. And it's for this reason that if you look at one of the genealogies in the Gospels, I forget which one it is, you'll find Tamar is mentioned. And so she is an ancestor of the Messiah. So that's one way Ephraim goes out of his way to explain a rather curious action by someone. The other case is even more surprising in some ways, and that is the case of Potiphar's wife, the Egyptian pharaoh. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce the patriarch Joseph, and in the narrative, of course, Joseph repels her, and that's all that you hear about her in the biblical text. But at several points later in the commentary by Ephraim, and I do recommend this commentary, when I first read it, I was completely bowled over. It was such an insightful piece of work, reading into the biblical text, where the biblical text doesn't tell you very much, but Ephraim sort of explores inwardly in a quite amazing place. Well, in the case of Potiphar's wife, he comes back to her in a number of different episodes and introduces her into the biblical narrative. And each time, she's beginning to repent in the first time, and then the second time, she has repented. So she becomes the model of the repentant woman. And this is taken over, rather surprisingly, into the Quran. And in later Muslim tradition, she's actually given a name, Zuleika. So going back to Ephraim, we have the origin of this Muslim Zuleika, how she came about. She goes back to the woman who tried to seduce Joseph. So a quite remarkable way of sort of bringing out the good side of women unexpectedly. Well, Ephraim wrote primarily in verse, and it's in his verse that his really deep theology and understanding of the interrelationship between the physical world and the divine world, he explains this, but in no single place. I said a bit about that in the first talk, so I won't say more about that. I've tried to bring this out in a little book called The Luminous Eye, which I think is still available. Now, Ephraim's writings have had an unfortunate history. After about the 6th century, people stopped copying the whole text. They anthologized him. They took odd verses or couples of verses and added them to other poems, what I mentioned in the previous talk. And so the Ephraim that we get from the medieval and the liturgical tradition is not the genuine Ephraim. And I once was confronted by someone who I'd given a talk about Ephraim, and that person said, "I find Ephraim extremely boring." And I said, "What have you read of Ephraim?" And he said, "These medieval liturgical texts." And, well, some of them are, quite frankly, rather boring. So I could sympathize, but I pointed out that, in fact, you have to read the genuine Ephraim, and that means modern translations into English of the proper edition of his poems, which only came about in the second half of the 20th century. It was largely the work of a Benedictine scholar in Germany. So Ephraim is not easily accessible, but there's quite a lot now available in English in good translations. Jacob Syriac, another wonderful poet, he's totally different as a poet from Ephraim. Jacob writes narrative poetry, and whereas Ephraim is essentially lyrical poetry. Jacob's narrative poetry is very often on biblical topics, and what he does so brilliantly is he'll relate the biblical text, and then he'll provide an interpretation which is his own understanding, and it's a very creative understanding. It's usually a Christological understanding, so if it's an Old Testament passage, he will point out how that is relevant through symbols and types, how it is relevant to the Christian tradition. And these poems on biblical topics I find very illuminating. They're not, of course, historically correct or anything like that, but they're explorations of how you can extract meaning from these episodes. It's certainly not the only meaning, but it's one of the possible meanings. And if it's meaningful to the reader, well and good. Quite a lot now of these poems have been translated into English. There's a series produced by the Gorgias Press in America with bilingual Syriac and English translations. And you can find, for example, you can find the poem of Jacob on Tamar from Genesis 38. It's a very beautiful poem. But many other And I do recommend, if you want a good way into understanding a biblical text, and in a meaningful way in a modern Christian context, then I do recommend one has to distinguish between, as it were, scientific biblical scholarship, which is interested in the historical context of the biblical text, and the literary reading of the biblical text, which is reading of the text as it comes down and trying to find a meaning. So the sort of thing that one's interested in any church tradition. So Jacob is another wonderful writer from that point of view. The next writer I want to mention is quite a different character. He's another Jacob, Jacob of Edessa. He lived right at the end of the 7th century, just into the 8th century. So he's living under Islamic rule already. And he is probably the most learned person in the whole Eastern world at the time. And he writes on all sorts of things. He's particularly important historically for a chronicle, World Chronicle, which unfortunately we've only got fragments of it, but it's used by later writers. It's also very important academically because he's the first person who wrote a Syriac grammar, and his understanding of grammatical theory is very profound. And this too, we have bits of it, but unfortunately we've only got later reinterpretations of it. He was a great reviser of translations, earlier translations. What tended to happen is early Syriac translations were what are technically called dynamic. They tried to bring the text to the reader, make them intelligible to the reader, but over the course of time, because of the prestige of Greek culture, and it grew over the centuries, they became much more close to the Greek original, so they're much more literal translations. So there's a great program of retranslating or revising old translations. And Jacob did this with a number of texts by church fathers, including the poems of Severus of Antioch, and these are the Matniotho, which are used in the Syrian Orthodox liturgical tradition. So he's very important as a translator. He also retranslated Severus of Antioch's homilies, which are very interesting documents, well worth reading. And many other things. He was a canon lawyer, so he is very interested in church law, and he has a whole series of questions and answers where people ask him difficult questions and he answers them. And these are wonderful insight into, as it were, everyday problems of his lifetime. So Jacob is a remarkable figure. He also has several surviving letters which deal with Syriac literature and as well as with churches, canon law questions and so on. So a very important figure. And then a man just before from the Syriac so-called Renaissance, from the 12th century, Dionysius Barsalibe. He was, like many people of that period, you call them a polymath. He writes on all sorts of things. He comments on philosophy, on Aristotelian philosophy in Syriac translation. He comments on a number of church fathers. But what is important from our point of view, he is the first Syrian Orthodox writer who survives, who has a commentary on the whole Bible. And his commentary is a very interesting document. People are getting more interested in it now, and quite a lot is now available in accessible editions. So the edition by the Syrian Orthodox Patriarchate, just the Syriac text, came out quite recently. The next person I want to mention, I've already mentioned it, Bar Ibroyo, who is a fantastic polymath, and I've mentioned that he writes in all these different areas with great detail, and he's a quite amazing person, and he was a very busy ecclesiastic because he ended up as Mafrian, the senior bishop in the eastern part of the Syrian Orthodox Church, and so he had a very busy life, and yet he managed to write these huge, great tomes. His work is quite astonishing, and to study it you need to know not only Arabic, Greek philosophy, you need to know Muslim philosophy, you need to know Persian as well, because he makes use of Persian sources. So very few people today, of course, have that ability, and I certainly haven't. But there are a few people who do work on him, and so he is one of the really great figures. But my last figure is a modern figure from 20th century. In my lifetime, I overlapped with him, probably not in many of yours, and that is the late Patriarch Barsom, the Syrian Orthodox Patriarch, who died in 1957, just when I was getting interested in Syriac. He was another of these amazing scholars. Besides having a very important ecclesiastical career, he wrote extensively, and he is the author of a very important history of Syriac literature, which has been translated into many different languages. So he's a fitting recent major figure in the Syrian Orthodox tradition. Now, to end up with just a word or two, those of you who've got the handout, I've put at the end some of the main printed sources that are available if you want to explore more about the Syriac tradition. And the first one I put down is the very useful encyclopedic dictionary of the Syriac heritage, which was published in 2011, and that's available free on the internet, so that's very accessible. It has short entries about all the major Syriac writers and Syriac topics, with a brief bibliography, so it's probably one of the best first ways in. So if you're interested, say, in medicine, just look up the medicine in the dictionary and you'll find a good introduction. The other very good introduction in book form is by two French scholars, Françoise Brical-Châtonnet and Muriel Dubé, and that's called, in English translation, The Syriac World. And that, I think, is a really excellent presentation of the Syriac tradition from the beginnings right up to today. It's well written, very well illustrated, and it introduces you to not just the literary culture, but also the material culture of architecture, manuscript illumination, and so on. The other works I put down is another book also called The Syriac World. This is more an academic work. It's very fat, nearly 600 pages, I think, but it has chapters on specific topics and sometimes specific writers, and it's all the chapters are done by recognized scholars working in this field, so it's highly authoritative, and at a sort of secondary level, of a more detailed level, this is a very useful work. And right at the end of it, you'll find a section on the academic internet websites. There are, of course, a lot of non-academic websites to do with the Syriac traditions, either official ones of the different churches or many others too. But if you want the academic ones, you'll find information about how to find them at the end of Daniel King's Syriac World. And then at the end of it, I put down this project of the late Bishop Julius Zizek, which in the end came to be called the Hidden Pearl. We had a lot of discussion about what to call it, which he asked me to do the written text of the 3 volumes that accompany the documentary. And I've listed there the contents, since it's quite useful to know what is covered. Basically, my aim was to go from the ancient Aramaic tradition, so that's going back to the first millennium BC, and we know quite a lot about Aramaic tradition in that period, especially in the last 300 years, the so-called Hellenistic period, when we have quite a number of rather dramatic texts, not of course yet in Syriac, but in other Aramaic dialects. And then it goes on covering all the Syriac traditions up to the 3rd volume is more specifically Syrian Orthodox, and that deals, for example, with the liturgical tradition, the theological tradition, and various other things which are specific to and the diaspora, development of the diaspora, and the fate of the Syrian Orthodox in the massacres in the what's called the Sifo, the sword, 1915 onwards. So my aim was really to provide an encyclopedia in narrative form, taking you from the ancient world to the modern age. So I learned a great deal writing it, so I hope anyone reading it will also find it useful. So thank you again for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Brock, for those incredibly insightful talks. We'll be now having our second Q&A session.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions from the audience that they would like to answer, it's your chance. Yeah, Andrea has a question.
So my question relates to the first lecture. So what are the, what's the greatest hindrance that you've had when reviving your anaphoras? What has been like the biggest struggle when reviving these anaphoras and then trying to canonize them? The anaphoras.
Well, I suppose the first problem is that one needs to have the text of all the old ones. And there was a great project undertaken in Rome in the middle of last century to have a series of these anaphoras using the best manuscripts. And the oldest manuscripts go back to the 8th century, but they're very rare, 8th, 9th century. So that was at the beginning of the movement in modern times. And then the different churches produced volumes of anaphoras. A very useful bilingual Syriac-English one was produced in America by the late Mar Athanasius. And that has got quite a good English translation. In India, the Malankara Orthodox scholar, Father Baby Varghese, has produced a huge number of anaphoras based on the manuscripts that he had accessible. They're usually quite reliable texts, He's got 2 fat volumes with English translations. So we now, and the second volume only came out a few years ago, so we now have, I think, 99% of all that is available. There are 1 or 2 which haven't been published yet. And the question now, I suppose, is, as I mentioned, only a dozen or a bit more in current use in any of the Syriac churches, Syrian Orthodox churches. How to adapt to modern requirements, especially in the diaspora. I'm sure there have been discussions, but I have not been part of them, so I don't know what's happened. There are obvious places where one could shorten text. In fact, one of the places is in the intercessions after the Tubdain prayers, which in the past were much longer, so they've already been shortened. And there are probably other places where that could also be the case without doing serious harm to the either structure or the content. And this is the problem with liturgical reform. You can, and this has happened in some of the Western churches, and it caused a lot of controversy. And so anything to do with liturgical reform causes controversy. But if it's done well, it's good. One area where I do think would be very beneficial is not so much in the anaphoras, but in the weekday office. Now, once or twice in the course of those, you have language which is very hostile to the Jews. And that's such an important aspect, especially in Western society, due to the Holocaust, that it would be good to look at these passages. I use the Shechimo, the weekday prayers myself, and I have rewritten for my own use, not for everyone else it's necessary, those passages, put them into Syriac in verse form so they fit. But I think if that happened as well officially, that would be a good step.
Especially the Good Friday service.
Oh, the Good Friday service, of course. That's the place where you find them. But on the Friday Sapro, there's a passage, I think 2 passages. One passage is definitely I rewrote for my own use. So that's how I.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yeah, over there.
Okay, so Professor, earlier I was reading a book, when I say earlier, a few weeks, maybe months back, but I was reading a book made by a priest of our church. His name is Father Mani Rajan. You may know him, you may not know him. And I saw in that book, he referenced a lot of yours and I think it was David Taylor's works. And in that book, he was talking about some of the saints and the early prelates of our church. And I came across a King Abgar the Black, or Abgar of Urhoy. And so for those of you that don't know, this King Abgar, he wrote a letter to Jesus asking to meet Jesus because he wanted Jesus to heal him of an illness, of which Jesus responded saying, "I'm sorry, I cannot meet with you right now. I need to carry out my mission, but I will send an apostle as a delegate to heal you." And so my question to you, Professor, is how reliable is this letter that we have here, and what is the theological significance that it brings about, such as apostolic succession?
Thank you, good question. Quite difficult to answer. Now, from an academic point of view, when we look at this literature about Abgar, there's a great deal, both in the Syriac and Armenian tradition, about him. He first appears in Eusebius of Caesarea, who's writing about 300 AD. And Eusebius says he's got this tradition from the archive of Edessa. Now, modern scholars have debated, is this historical, is it not, and which Abgar is concerned, because it's not clear. One assumes that it's from the apostolic period, but if that's so, there are historical problems, because if Christianity in Edessa really went back to the 1st century, we have no trace of it until very much later. So that's a puzzle. So modern scholarship, on the whole, has identified the Abgar as not Abgar the Fifth, the Black, but Abgar the Eighth, who belonged late 2nd century. And so the origins of Christianity are tied up with that Abgar, according to modern scholarship. That fits with another detail in the Doctrina, the teaching of Addai, which is a Syriac account, very early, probably about 400. And that says the apostolic tradition in Antioch was linked with Rome, with a particular figure, a Pope of Rome, and that figure belongs again to the late 2nd century. So what one's got in the written tradition is a confused picture, some of which, as it were, points back to conversion in the 1st century, an apostolic period, which is probably not historically correct, and other pointers suggesting a much later period. But then one has to remember, in the wider context, that round about 300, and especially after Constantine, his conversion of Constantine comes a decade or two after 300, and at that period, Christians in all over the Christian world, Mediterranean world, started thinking about their origins. And because they'd been so keen, and also under persecution, they hadn't really thought about this question of, as it were, historical ancestry. And so they all started trying to find apostolic origins for different parts of the Christian world. The most clear case of unhistorical case would be of Constantinople. Well, Constantinople only became Constantinople when it was founded by Constantine. It had been a small town or small village even before that, and it certainly had not got an apostolic tradition or any early Christian tradition. But the Apostle Andrew came to be seen as the Apostle of Constantinople. And other places came, not invented, but decided upon different apostolic origins. And for Edessa, it's indirectly Thomas, and Thomas sends Addai to Edessa. Now, it's also, from a historical point of view, quite apart from these traditions. It's quite likely that at an oral level, Christianity did spread east just as fast as it spread west. But unfortunately, we've got no historical evidence of it. The most telling evidence is actually in the Dura Europos, which is on the Euphrates. It was a fortress city between the Persians, and it was a Roman city between the Romans and the Persians. And it was destroyed in 256. Now, it was excavated in the 20th century, and it produced two quite remarkable things. The first was a Christian baptistry. So a baptistry in this rather out-of-the-way border site. There was a Christian baptistry. Unfortunately, no inscriptions, so we don't know what language they spoke, but it's very likely that it would have been probably Syriac or something related to Syriac. It could have been Palmyrene, because Palmyrene is very similar to Syriac. But we haven't got any evidence. So that is, as it were, the first material contact of the evidence for Christianity in this region. So the material evidence and the literary evidence and the historical probability, it's very difficult to weigh them all up. In fact, you can't be certain. If anyone says that they're certain what the tradition was, you can assure them that no one really knows. There are possibilities, there are probabilities, but no more than that. So the Abgar tradition is also, it has an amazing afterlife, because it's also tied up with the image of Christ and the syndone, the famous the Veronica tradition in Latin tradition, the veil which the buried Christ had on his face. So the famous veil of I can't think what's the modern term. In Greek it's the syndone, with the portrait of Christ. Now, in the Abgar legend, we can see how this sort of developed. In the oldest text, it's a painting by the emissary, Adai. A bit later, in the 6th century, it becomes a painting not made by hands. And then in the 7th century, it becomes a material exchanged. It's the syndone, it's cloth. And then eventually it gets fused with the legend of Veronica, who doesn't appear in Syriac tradition at all. And then it becomes the syndone connected with the famous the veil with the portrait of Christ imprinted on of the dead Christ. So all this is extremely complex and complicated tradition, all going back to Abgar.
Can I just ask something? When Professor was mentioning that tradition, which is in the early 2nd century, was it Hippolytus? Hippolytus.
Yes. No, the writer was Eusebius.
Yes. I think, I don't know whether you know that Hippolytus is the author of the Eucharistic prayer in the Roman Catholic Church. His history is, he was an Egyptian, but he went to Jerusalem and learned the Jerusalem tradition, then went back to West and written the Eucharistic prayer 1 in Catholic Church. That was used until 1966. That Eucharistic prayer is the written in AD 120. Thank you. I was suspense, that was.
Professor Brock, could I quickly follow up on that question? So you just said that the letter, the reliability of it is based on probabilities and possibilities. If we take that letter as true, do we have any idea of who it was that Jesus sent? Has there been research into who that figure was, whether it be a direct apostle of Jesus or any of the evangelists, etc.?
Well, Abgar sends the letter to Jesus, and in the earliest tradition, Jesus sends an oral reply, and then quite soon that becomes a letter, and that letter is conveyed by Abgar's emissary and he promises to send someone to preach to Abgar, and that someone is Adai. And so Adai, in the developed Syriac form, this is the teaching of Adai, you have Adai's preaching to the congregation in Edessa, his conversion of King Abgar, and eventually he gets martyred. So as the time goes on, the literature gets more and more detailed. Eusebius doesn't mention the portrait, but that's in the Syriac form. People have wondered about this and speculated, but there are all sorts of possibilities. So that probably doesn't answer your question properly.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to wrap up our Q&A session now because we are at a tight schedule. If you have any unanswered questions, not to worry, you can contact any of the JSOSM members, and I'm sure we can get the questions to you, Dr. Brock, to answer in the future. So I would like to invite Elder Sachin and Nohan Alias onto the stage to present a memento to Dr. Sebastian Brock. Thank you.
Dear Professor Sebastian Brock, that was wonderful lesson and teachings. It was excellent. We really appreciate your presence and your time and the lessons you taught us today. So on behalf of student movement and Father Lilu and everyone gathered today, we would like to give a big thanks to Dr. Sebastian Brock. Please give a applause to and may I give a small token of our appreciation to Dr. Sebastian Brock, please. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
As we come to an end of today's lectures and Q&A session, we just want to take a moment to express our sincere thanks to you, Dr. Brock, for taking the time out of your day to plan and prepare for this. You've provided us with such an in-depth knowledge of our faith and really broadened our understanding of it. We love having you here at Oxford as a member of our parish and in the Jacobite community. I'm sure we can all take away something new with us today. We are truly grateful for your work. Thank you to our patriarchal vicar, His Grace Isaac Moore Ostatios Tirumeni, who has been very inspirational to the diocese and particularly our youth. We'd like to especially thank our vicar, Elder Sachin. Though he's only been with us for a short while, his contributions to our church have been amazing. He has been so motivating and supportive of everyone. Also, thank you to Philip Achin for being an ever-present face in our church, always here to help and guide us and support us. A massive thank you to Lillo Achin and the entire JSOSM committee for all of your hard work and dedication in the past few weeks, helping plan and arrange this entire event, as well as all the social media promotions. Thank you also to the MSOC UK Joint Secretary Bijo Anko, who has joined us today. I would also like to thank our Oxford Church Committee and parish members, who also have been helping with arranging the event and coordinating food and commodities. Thank you to the tech team, who have been working behind the scenes, allowing many others who are not in Oxford to watch through the MSOC live stream. Your efforts were key to making everything run smoothly. And again, we greatly thank each and every one of you. Last but not least, thank you to every single one of you who has joined us today, those of you who have traveled so far to be here in person, and those of you in the live stream. We hope you all enjoyed this fascinating talk and were able to make the most out of this wonderful opportunity, leaving today with a new connection to the faith. So let us pray for more events like these in the future that will bring us closer together as a community, helping to build our faith, our youth, and our church. I'll now be handing over to Elder Sachin, who will be leading a 10-minute group discussion just to reflect on everything we've just heard. Once again, thank you.
In the absence of the Vice President, Father Lillu Varghese, may I stand and have an informal discussion as a preliminary section. You can contribute anything you would like to contribute in regards to this event and the student movement, the overall view of student movement, the objectives, what we should go forward for the next, our plans, schedules, etc. You can contribute anything. I found this is again a wonderful chance for you, as somebody was mentioning here. You are the future of our church in UK. There is no doubt about it. So it's better for you to have a clarity and a good understanding and knowledge of your church, what you believe in, what you're practicing. When you mingle with some other faith students or relations, you should know what is the basic fundamental teachings of the Syrian Orthodox Church. If you invite somebody to our liturgy, you should know what is the basis of our liturgy. So, in the beginning, I mentioned that what are the uniqueness of this Syriac Orthodox Church? I would say, why should we be proud of our Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church? Has anyone got some answers for that? What are the main factors which you are proud of? The Malangara Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church. Can anyone? Yes. Yes. Very good. The Aramaic language, that Jesus spoke the Aramaic language. Jesus and Mother Mary and the apostles or Galileans, they spoke Aramaic language. The Syriac is the dialect of the Aramaic language. And we are the only one church using the Aramaic language regularly in our worship. So we can be proud of, we are using Jesus language. Jokingly, I used to say when I was a Sunday school student, the heavens understand clearly this language than any other language. That's a joke. But we are proud of it. Syriac language, Aramaic language we are using. Okay, the next uniqueness of the Syriac Orthodox Church. Why should we be proud of? Similar to those kind of answers I am looking for. I don't know how much time I left. When are we supposed to finish this? 4 o'clock. Okay, quick. Oh, come on, guys. Yes. Good. St. Peter the Apostle started or established the church in Antioch in AD 37. However, there is a Western tradition, Syro-Malabar Catholic Church also inherit that tradition in Rome because St. Peter was martyred in Rome. However, I accept that answer because the first established church was in Antioch, which was by the Apostle St. Peter. Very good. The next uniqueness of our church, or why should we be proud of our church? our Holy Mass. Yeah. I'll give you 90% of the answer. You know, I'll tell you why. കർത്താവിൻ്റെ സഹോദരനായ the brother of apostle, brother of Jesus, St. James, who written the liturgy of St. James. Our liturgy is St. James liturgy. That is what the Dr. Sebastian was mentioning, the Greek version and the Syriac version of St. James liturgy. So we inherited a belief that this liturgy was taught by the Lord himself. So the brother of apostle St. James heard it from the Lord Jesus, and he done the first mass in upper room on Wednesday, which is the following of Pentecost. Yeah. ആദ്യത്തെ സിനഡ് നടന്നു പെന്റിക്കോസ്റ്റിന് ശേഷം. Then they decided where should we go to preach the gospel. Then the third day, Wednesday, St. James celebrate the Holy Kurbano in the upper room. That was the first Holy Kurbano. We are proud because we are using the same liturgy. വേറെയും ആളുകൾ യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. മാരോനൈറ്റ് ചർച്ച്, നെസ്റ്റോറിയൻ ചർച്ചൊക്കെ സെൻറ്റ് ജെയിംസ് ലിറ്റർജി യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ വി ആർ ദ വൺ. ബേസിക്കലി നിങ്ങൾക്കറിയാമോ, എവറി ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻ്റ് ഡേ ഇൻ ദ ചർച്ച്, ഈവൻ ഈസ് എ പെരുന്നാൾ or even a priest come and celebrate a mass first time, he must do the St. James liturgy. Also Dr. Sebastian also mentioned that there are 80 anaphoras available. Among them the first one is St. James. That is the most important one, written by the brother of our Lord Jesus Christ. So I give you a mark for 90%. All very good. So our liturgy, that's what we are proud of. Then there are many we should know. നമ്മുടെ ചർച്ചിൻ്റെ പ്രാധാന്യം എന്തെന്ന് we should know. Yes, any answer? ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ I might conclude. Anything else? Who is our head of the church? Who is it? Maran Mor Ignatius Ephraim II. He is the 123rd Patriarch of Antioch. The Antioch is the place where the name Christians was first called. അമ്മായിയാണോ പറഞ്ഞേ? coming to that point. Hold on this one. അന്ത്യോഖ്യയിൽ വെച്ചാണ് ക്രിസ്ത്യാനികൾ ആദ്യം വിളിക്കപ്പെട്ടത്. ആദ്യം കളിയാക്കി വിളിച്ചു ദ ഫോളോവേഴ്സ് ഓഫ് ജീസസ്. നാണമില്ലാതെ ജീസസിൻ്റെ പുറകെ നടക്കുന്നവൻ, ദ ഫോളോവേഴ്സ് ഓഫ് ജീസസ് ഓർ ക്രിസ്ത്യൻസ്. അത് നമ്മൾ ചലഞ്ചായിട്ട് എടുത്തു. ആ സ്ഥലം അന്ത്യോഖ്യയാണ്. ഈ അന്ത്യോഖ്യയിലാണ് സഭ സ്ഥാപിച്ചത്. അവിടുത്തെ സിംഹാസനത്തിലാണ് നമ്മുടെ അന്ത്യോഖ്യ പാത്രീസ് ബാവ ഇപ്പോഴും ഇരിക്കുന്നത്. സോ വി ആർ പ്രൗഡ് ഓഫ് ഇറ്റ്. അമ്മായി പറഞ്ഞ പോയിന്റാണ് വൈ ഷുഡ് ബി പ്രൗഡ് ഓഫ് ഇറ്റ്. അമ്മായി ഒന്നുകൂടി റിപ്പീറ്റ് ചെയ്യാമോ? എക്സാക്ട്ലി. വെരി ഗുഡ്. ഒന്ന് കൈയടിച്ച്. Did you understand that point? We are using the same lehamo. പുളിപ്പുള്ള അപ്പമാണ് നമ്മൾ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. അതിന് സുറിയാനിയിൽ ലഹമോ എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. ഈ അപ്പം എവറി ഡേ മേക്ക് ചെയ്യാനേ നമുക്ക് പറ്റുള്ളൂ. വി ആർ അലൗഡ് ടു യൂസ് ഇറ്റ്. മേക്ക് ഇറ്റ് എവറി മോർണിംഗ് ബിഫോർ ദ കുറോബോ. ആൻഡ് വി യൂസ് ദ പുളിപ്പ്, ദ ലെമൺ. ഫ്രം ദാറ്റ് ലെവനീസ് വി കണ്ടിന്യൂസ്ലി ഗോട്ട് ഇറ്റ് ഫ്രം ദ അപ്പർ റൂം. അതാണ് നമ്മുടെ ഒരു പ്രാധാന്യം. ആദ്യവും ചെല്ലിയ കുർബാനയുടെ അംശമെടുത്ത് മാറ്റിവെച്ച് അതുകൊണ്ട് വീണ്ടും ആ ലെവൻ, ആ പുളിപ്പ് ഉപയോഗിച്ച് ഇന്നും മലങ്കര യാക്കോബായ സുറിയാനി സഭ ട്രഡീഷൻ ഫോളോ ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഇതിടയ്ക്കൊന്ന് മുറിഞ്ഞു പോയിരുന്നു. എവിടെയാണെന്ന് ആർക്കെങ്കിലും പറയാമോ ഹിസ്റ്റോറിക്കലി? ഇത് മുറിഞ്ഞത് മലങ്കരയിൽ ഒന്ന് മുറിഞ്ഞുപോയി. പോർച്ചുഗീസുകാർ വന്ന് നമ്മുടെ ഇതെല്ലാം ഇൻവൈഡ് ചെയ്ത് നശിപ്പിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ ഈ പുളിപ്പുള്ള അപ്പത്തിൻ്റെ അംശം നമുക്ക് നശിച്ചു. ദെൻ വി റീഗെയിൻ ഇറ്റ് ഫ്രം ഹൂ? വടക്കൻ പറവൂർ കാലം ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്ന അബ്ദുൽ ജലീൽ മോർ ഗ്രിഗോറിയോസ് ബാവ. ഇത് 1665 കോതമംഗലത്ത് വന്നിരിക്കുന്ന എൽദോമാർ ബെസോലിയോസ് ബാവയ്ക്ക് 20 വർഷം മുമ്പ് മലങ്കരയിൽ വന്നതാണ്. 1665 അബ്ദുൽ ജലീൽ മോർ ഗ്രിഗോറിയോസ്. ആ ബാവയാണ് വീണ്ടും പുളിപ്പുള്ളി അപ്പം കൊണ്ടുവന്ന് നമുക്ക് വീണ്ടും ആ ട്രഡീഷൻ കീപ്പ് ചെയ്യാൻ സാധിച്ചത്. വെൽ ഡൺ അമ്മായി, താങ്ക് യു. Any of the uniqueness of our Syrian church? കേട്ടില്ല. Of course, we are follow the Syrian tradition even in Malangara. That is why we are proud of. Yes? Anything else? ഒത്തിരി ഉണ്ട് മക്കളെ. ഇന്ന് ഈ സാർ ഇവിടെ എടുത്ത ക്ലാസ്സിൽ നിന്ന് തന്നെ Holy Moron. Anything else? Of course, we do remember and recall and emphasize the role of the Saint John the Baptist, not only in sacraments, rather especially in the beginning of the Holy Kurbana. ത്രോണോസ് ചുറ്റിക്കൊണ്ട് ആദ്യം അച്ഛൻ പ്രൊക്ലെയിം ചെയ്യുന്നത് എന്താണ്? നിന്നെ പ്രസവിച്ച മറിയാമും നിന്നെ മാമോദീസ മുക്കിയ യോഹന്നാനും ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി നിന്നോട് അപേക്ഷിക്കും. അതുകൊണ്ട് നടുവിലൊരു തിരി കത്തിച്ചു വയ്ക്കും. എപ്പോൾ വരെ? സ്നാപക യോഹന്നാൻ്റെ സാന്നിധ്യമാണ് നടുവിലത്തെ ഒരു തിരി. തൂയോബയുടെ സമയത്ത് ശുശ്രൂഷക്കാരൻ ആ തിരി എടുത്തും കൊണ്ടാണ് ത്രോണോസിൽ അച്ഛൻ്റെ മുമ്പിൽ കറങ്ങുന്നത്. വാട്ട് ഈസ് ദാറ്റ് മീൻ? ഹി ഈസ് ദ ഫോർ റണ്ണർ ഓഫ് ദ ലോർഡ് ജീസസ്. ദ സെൻറ്റ് ജോൺ ദ ബാപ്റ്റിസ്റ്റ് ഈസ് ദ ഫോർ റണ്ണർ ഓഫ് ദ ലോർഡ് ജീസസ്. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് വാട്ട് ഈസ് സിംപ്ലിഫൈയിങ്. ഓക്കെ, ഇന്നത്തെ ക്ലാസ്സിനെ ബേസ് ചെയ്തായിരുന്നു ഞാൻ ചോദിച്ചത്. പക്ഷേ ഇന്നത്തെ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ പ്രൊഫസർ സെബാസ്റ്റ്യൻ ബ്രോക്ക് ഒത്തിരി ഡീപ്പായ വെരി ബുള്ളർ പോയിൻറ്റ്സ് ആണ് പറഞ്ഞത്. ലിറ്റർജിക്കൽ ട്രഡീഷനും സിറിയക് ട്രഡീഷനും അത് മുഴുവൻ പറയാനോ റിക്കോൾ ചെയ്യാനൊന്നും പറ്റില്ല. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇന്ന് കേട്ടതിൽ നിന്ന് എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു സംശയങ്ങൾ സാറിനോട് ചോദിച്ചു. ഇഫ് എനി അഡീഷണൽ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് ഓർ ഡൗട്ട്സ്? I know this is an excellent topic. നമ്മുടെ ട്രഡീഷൻസ് എവിടെയാണെന്ന് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് മനസ്സിലായി കാണും. നമ്മുടെ ട്രഡീഷൻ്റെ സ്ഥാനം പ്രൊഫസർ സെബാസ്റ്റ്യൻ ബ്രോക്ക് put it in a third tradition, which is not Greek tradition, not Latin tradition. ഏതാണ് ഗ്രീക്ക് ട്രഡീഷൻ? ഗ്രീക്ക് ട്രഡീഷൻ is the Eastern Church. Latin is the Western Church. But he would like to put us in a special position is the third tradition, which is the Syriac tradition or the Oriental tradition. അപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ഹിസ്റ്റോറിക്കലി കാണുന്നത് ഈസ്റ്റേൺ ചർച്ച്, വെസ്റ്റേൺ ചർച്ച്. Between we are finding our own tradition, Oriental tradition. So we are not with Eastern Greek. We are not with Western in 100%. We are in the middle. This kind of neutrality, the third position in every, almost there are few other aspects. The view of our Bible. എന്താണ് വിശുദ്ധ വേദപുസ്തകത്തെക്കുറിച്ച് നമ്മുടെ സഭയുടെ ചിന്ത? ഈസ്റ്റ് പറയും എന്തെന്ന്? വെസ്റ്റ് പറയും നമുക്കറിയാം. പ്രൊട്ടസ്റ്റന്റ് ബാക്ക്ഗ്രൗണ്ടിലെല്ലാം അവർ പറയും എന്ത്? സോളാ സ്ക്രിപ്ചർ, only the Bible, only the Bible. വെസ്റ്റ് പറഞ്ഞു the church finds the Bible. പ്രൊട്ടസ്റ്റന്റ് പറഞ്ഞു Bible finds the church. You should understand the difference. Church finds the Bible and the Bible finds the church. Where is our position? We combine both, we have a third position. That is why our position of the Bible is in the middle. Evangelion Muthi Nadukana. Yes, the importance of the Bible. അപ്പോൾ ഇതുപോലെയുള്ള നമ്മുടെ സുറിയാനി സഭയുടെ പ്രാധാന്യങ്ങൾ ഒത്തിരിയുണ്ട്, ഒത്തിരി യുണീക്ക്നെസ്സായ കാര്യങ്ങൾ നമുക്കുണ്ട്. ഈ ചുരുങ്ങിയ സമയം കൊണ്ട് അതൊന്നും പറയാൻ സാധിക്കുകയില്ല. ഞാനതുകൊണ്ട് ഇന്നത്തെ സാറിൻ്റെ ക്ലാസ്സിലേക്കൊന്നും ഞാൻ തിരിച്ചു പോകുന്നില്ല. പക്ഷേ അതിൽ സാറ് ഏറ്റവും അവസാനം സാറ് വാസ് Professor Sebastian was pinpointing 6 people in the Syriac church. The first one was the son of Ephraim, of course. അപ്രേമിൻ്റെ ബൗസ ചെല്ലാതെ നമ്മൾ കടന്നുറങ്ങില്ല. ഏതാ ഈ അപ്രോമിൻ്റെ ബൗസ? കർത്താവേ കൃപ ചെയ്യണമേ, പ്രാർത്ഥന നീ കൈക്കൊള്ളണമേ. യാക്കോബിൻ്റെ ബൗസ ഏതാണ്? പള്ളിയിലെല്ലാം ചൊല്ലുക, മാതൃവിശുദ്ധരോട് ഓർമ്മയിൽ ഞങ്ങളെ ചേർത്തിയിട്ട്. So son of Ephraim the poet. I was a little bit confused when Professor was saying about the whether the son of Ephraim was a monk or a deacon. Sir, that was true. In some places we have a confusion whether he is a deacon or whether he is a monk. But I got my own answer humbly. May not be true or right. But in the Syrian tradition, a monk can be a deacon. We call it a Sarvoyo Ramban. ഷെമ്മാസനായിരിക്കുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ തലയിൽ മസനം സേട്ട് റംബാനാകാം. So maybe he was a Sarvoyo Ramban. Deacon and as the same as a monk can be an answer. Okay. The second person Sar പറഞ്ഞത്, that was a Jacob of Saruk. That was in the early 6th century-ലാണ്, 521-ലാണ്. ഈ കഴിഞ്ഞ പ്രാവശ്യം നമ്മൾ സെഞ്ചുറി ബൈസിനറി അല്ല, 1500-ൻ്റെ സെലിബ്രേഷനായിരുന്നു. അടുത്ത മൂന്നാമത് പറഞ്ഞ സെൻറ്റ് ജേക്കബ് ഓഫ് എഡേസ, നാലാമത് ഡൈനീഷ്യസ് ഓഫ് സലീബി 1117 അറൗണ്ട് 12th century ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഇന്ന് ഞാനിവിടെ ചൊല്ലിയ കുർബാന സലീബിയുടെയാണ്. ഡൈനീഷ്യസ് സലീബി ചൊല്ലിയ ദീവന്നാസ്യൂസിൻ്റെ ക്രമമാണ് ഞാനിന്ന് ചൊല്ലിയത്. അപ്പോൾ സാറുമായിട്ട് പറഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ ഐ ജസ്റ്റ് മെൻഷൻ ടീം ഐ യൂസ് ദി അനഫോറ ഓഫ് സെൻറ്റ് ജെയിംസ് ഓഫ് സലീബി. ഈ സലീബി സെൻറ്റ് ജെയിംസ് അനഫോറയ്ക്ക് ഒത്തിരി കോൺട്രിബ്യൂഷൻ ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളതാണ് മോശോ ബർഖീഫ ആൻഡ് ഓൾസോ സലീബി. സോ ദാറ്റ് ഡൈനീഷ്യസ് സലീബിയുടെ ആണ് ഏറ്റവും ചെറിയ കുർബാന എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഇച്ചിരി ഷോർട്ട്, ഒത്തിരി എലാബറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാത്ത കുർബാന. അതാണ് ഇന്ന് ഞാൻ ചൊല്ലിയത്. അഞ്ചാമത്തെ ആൾ പറഞ്ഞത് ബാറബ്രോസ്, 12-ാം നൂറ്റാണ്ടിൽ ജീവിച്ചിരുന്ന സുറിയാനി സഭയുടെ ഏറ്റവും വലിയ ഒരു സ്കോളറായിരുന്നു. അദ്ദേഹമാണ് ഹൂദായ കാനോൻ എഴുതിയത്. ബാറബ്രായ കാനാൻ ഹൂദായ കാനോൻ എഴുതിയത്. ഹി വാസ് എ ഡോക്ടർ, ഹി വാസ് എ ഫിലോസഫർ ആൻഡ് ഹി വാസ് എവറിഥിങ്. That is a great man lived in the 12th century. Then അവസാനം Professor Sebastian Brock mentioned the recent saint, our patriarch, we are proud of, Moric Ignatius Barsoum. എവിടെയാണ് ബർസോം പാത്രീസ് ബാവയെ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്? ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ ഇഗ്നാത്യോസ് അഫ്രേം സെക്കൻഡ്, ഇതിനു മുമ്പുണ്ടായിരുന്നത് ഇഗ്നാഷ്യസ് സാക്കാപ്രഥമൻ, അതിനു മുമ്പുണ്ടായിരുന്നത് ഇഗ്നാഷ്യോസ് യാക്കോബ് തൃതീയൻ, താങ്ക് യു ജിറ്റു. അതിനു മുമ്പുണ്ടായിരുന്ന ആളാണ് ഇഗ്നാഷ്യസ് മോർ അഫ്രേം. അതിനു തൊട്ട് മുമ്പുണ്ടായിരുന്ന ആളാരാണ്? ഇന്ന് നമ്മൾ ഓർമ്മ ആചരിച്ചു, മൊറാൻ മോർ ഇഗ്നാത്യോസ് ഏലിയാസ് ദിയൻ പാത്രിയർഗീസ് ബാവ. അങ്ങനെയാണ് നമ്മുടെ പാത്രിയർഗീസന്മാരുടെ ഹിസ്റ്ററി പോകുന്നത്. ഞാൻ നിർത്തുകയാണ്. അങ്ങനെ 6 മെയിൻ ഫിലോസഫേഴ്സ്, ഒപ്പം നമ്മുടെ മെയിൻ ആയിട്ടുള്ള പിതാക്കന്മാരുടെ പേരാണ് സാർ പറഞ്ഞത്. ഞാൻ നിർത്തുകയാണ്. സോ ദാറ്റ് വാസ് ഓവറോൾ ആൻഡ് എ ഗുഡ്, ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ്, എക്സലൻറ്റ് ടോപ്പിക്, എ ഗുഡ് എക്സ്പോസിഷൻ ഓഫ് this liturgical tradition, Syriac tradition, etc. I think you all have benefited it. If you do have any doubts, as somebody said, contact the leaders of this student movement, and they will forward to Professor Sebastian Brock. And kochu സംശയങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ you can forward to me and Philip Achan. We will try to answer it as well. നമുക്ക് ഇന്നത്തെ ഇവൻറ്റിനെ കുറിച്ചൊരു വാല്യുവേഷൻ പറയാമോ? How was it? How it went on? First of all, a big thank you to the venue people. The ഓക്സ്ഫോർഡ് പള്ളിയും ഇതിലെ കമ്മിറ്റിയും ഇതിലെ വനിതാ സമാജവും ഇത് ഡെക്കറേറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് നിങ്ങൾ കണ്ടോ? ഇത് നിങ്ങൾ ശ്രദ്ധിച്ചായിരുന്നോ? ഈ പച്ചപ്പ് ഈ പൂവൊക്കെ ചെറുതായിട്ടും തോന്നുന്നുണ്ട്. ഇതിനൊക്കെ പിന്നിൽ നിന്നുള്ളൊരു കഷ്ടപ്പാട് ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുമുണ്ട്. അതിന് ലീഡർഷിപ്പ് കൊടുത്ത സിജി ടീമിനൊക്കെ അനുമോദിക്കുകയാണ്, സമാജത്തിൻ്റെ ടീമിനൊക്കെ. ഇന്നിവിടെ എല്ലാവർക്കും ഭക്ഷണം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ മാനേജിങ് കമ്മിറ്റി ഓവറോൾ അതിൽ കൂടുതൽ സപ്ലൈ ചെയ്തു. ഇവിടെ ഈ പള്ളിയിൽ എല്ലാവരും ഇത് ഹോസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ചാർജ് എടുത്തു. ദാറ്റ് വാസ് എക്സലൻറ്റ്, വെരി ഗുഡ് ഇവൻറ്റ്. ദെൻ ഐ വോണ്ട് ടു ഹേർഡ് ഫ്രം യു ദ സ്റ്റുഡൻസ്. ഹൗ ഡു യു ഇവാലുവേറ്റ് ദിസ് ഇവൻറ്റ്? ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ പറയേണ്ടി മലയാളത്തിൽ പറഞ്ഞാലും അടിപൊളി എന്നുള്ളൊരു വാക്ക് ഇവിടുന്ന് വന്നു. Any other comment? Is it good? Yes. How can improve it? I wouldn't say this event improve it. What is our next step? നമ്മൾ കോവിഡ് കഴിഞ്ഞതിന് ശേഷം സ്റ്റുഡൻറ്റ് മൂവ്മെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു നമ്മുടെ ഒരു ആദ്യത്തെ ഇവൻ്റ് ഇതാണ്. ദിസ് വാസ് എ സ്റ്റാർട്ടിങ്. വി ഷുഡ് ഡു സംതിങ് നെക്സ്റ്റ് ദിസ് സമ്മർ നിയർ ടു ഫാമിലി കോൺഫറൻസ് ഓർ സംതിങ്. വാട്ട് ഡു യു തിങ്ക്? യു അഗ്രി? So when the Lilu Achan comes back, approach him, suggest him, and I have a suggestion to you. ഞാൻ ഈ കഴിഞ്ഞ ആഴ്ച ഇതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് ചോദിച്ചപ്പോൾ ഇതിൻ്റെ ഫൈനാൻസിൻ്റെ കാര്യം ഒന്ന് ചോദിച്ചു, എങ്ങനെ ഇത് നടത്തുമെന്നുള്ളത്. അപ്പോൾ ഇവരെല്ലാവരും പറഞ്ഞു, ഞാൻ ചോദിച്ചവരെ പറഞ്ഞു, അച്ഛാ ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് പൈസയൊന്നുമില്ല, ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് പൈസ. Yes, I know you don't have, you are students, you don't have money. But we are not poor. Our church is rich. Okay, ഇവിടെ UK ഡയോസിസ് ഉണ്ട്, നമ്മൾ വനിതാ സമാജത്തിന് സപ്പോർട്ടുണ്ട്, MGSSക്ക് നമ്മൾ സപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട് ഈ ഡയോസിസ്. അങ്ങനെയെങ്കിൽ ഫ്യൂച്ചറായ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഒരു എക്സ്പെൻസും കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ വരുമ്പോൾ യു ഷുഡ് അപ്രോച്ച് ദ ഡയോസിസ്, ദെൻ ദേ വിൽ കൺസിഡർ ഇറ്റ്. അത് തന്നെയാണ് കഴിഞ്ഞ യൂത്തിൻ്റെ ഇവൻറ്റിലും ഞാൻ സജസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്തത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഡോണ്ട് വറി അബൌട്ട് ഫൈനാൻസ്. Finance is nothing, is less important. You are important. നമ്മുടെ ഈ ട്യൂണിന്, സഭയുടെ ഈ ട്യൂണിലേക്ക് നിങ്ങളെല്ലാവരും വരണം, അതാണ് ഞങ്ങളുടെ ആഗ്രഹം. ഓക്കെ, അതുകൊണ്ട് നമുക്കൊരു ഫ്യൂച്ചർ ഇവൻ്റ് നിങ്ങളുടെ മനസ്സിലെല്ലാം ഉണ്ടോ? സമ്മർ ക്യാമ്പ് നമ്മൾ പണ്ട് ചെയ്ത പോലെയുള്ളതാണോ? 1 day or 3 days? Okay, who is the charge of the student movements? Who is the secretary? So Nohan will note it. We will have a summer camp. So please contact Lilu Achan, Vice President, and please request something to the diocese. We will make it as a nice event. Yeah? And find a date, find a place, inform this students, because they all are in uni and they're busy and occupied. Some people go to India, and so that holidays, etc. So find a date early, as much as early, and decide it. Okay, we will have a summer camp. Then ഫൈനലി എൻ്റെ ഒരു ചോദ്യമാണ്, ഇവിടെ ഒരു കമ്മിറ്റിയൊക്കെ ഉണ്ട് സ്റ്റുഡൻറ്റ് മൂവ്മെൻറ്റ്. എനിക്കതിനറിയില്ല, ലിലു അച്ഛൻ അത് വ്യക്തമായിട്ടറിയാം. Do we need to re-elect somebody, or the current committee? What is the position? Who are they? This current committee on the stand up? Can you stand up? On the come forward. Come forward. Let us see you. Oh, this is a nice group. Well done. Idil are secretary. Nohan is the secretary. Who is the treasurer? Treasurer vanilla. Okay. ബാക്കിയുള്ളവരെല്ലാം കമ്മിറ്റിയാണ്. ഇനി again any titles in it? പബ്ലിസിറ്റി, സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയ, ജോയിൻറ്റ് സെക്രട്ടറി ആരാ? ആൻഡ്രിയ. ട്രഷറി ഇല്ലെങ്കിലും മോനിട്ട്. പിന്നെ മീഡിയ ആരാ? സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയ. ഓരോ സോണിന് ഓരോ കോർഡിനേറ്റേഴ്സ്. പെർസോൺ. എക്സലൻറ്റ്. സോ യു ഹാവ് എ സ്ട്രക്ചർ. സോ ഇതെന്നായിരുന്നു നിങ്ങളെ എടുത്തത്? ഒരു ലാസ്റ്റ് സമ്മർ. നൗ ഇറ്റ്സ് so when we will have a re-elect at the next summer camp. Okay. We'll get a whole new committee properly set out, which is ahead of all the units. So people from every unit will be able to participate in the voting, and based off that, they will then hopefully continue to build more units and more churches and continue the events in JSOSM. Very good. So we will have a general body meeting online with Lilu Achan, and we will elect a new committee that time. Yeah? Within 2 months. That is our decision today. Okay. Anything else? Do you want to? Okay. And also, yes.
And as you guys said with like the summer camp, that is going to happen. That was hopefully like supposed to happen. Well, it was supposed to happen hopefully last year. That's why we started this student movement based off the previous camps that we had. That was the main aim of it. Again, restart what we had, which is so good, which is what a lot of our older Chetas and Chechis became friends of. They all knew each other, which is how they all networked, and all of them work together in the youth now. For example, we have Angel Chechi here, and they all know people in a lot of other churches, and live with the Chechi, for example, and those guys are able to build connections. And that is fully the whole point of this. All of us build connections, come to Palli, and actually be encouraged to do stuff in our Sabaya. So there will be a camp this year, no matter who's on committee or not, like there will be. And MSOC will approve that. We will do that whenever it is best for everyone. We've had a small discussion as a committee, and that was probably towards the end of summer, was most likely. But again, that will be reaffirmed based off what MSOC says and what the future committee will decide. But most likely, the end of summer, again, we want a few days, like everyone said, 2-3 days at least, so that everyone can get to know each other a lot better, and just, again, have a lot of fun, and also get to know the Sabra a lot better. So it will happen. And also in the meanwhile, we want to run a lot more events like this, whether in person or online. Like the turnout today is amazing. This many people coming out not from Oxford is amazing to see. Okay, for a talk that we didn't expect was going to be this many people, it's really nice to see this many people turn up, especially with the committee, everybody being here. The amount of effort these guys have all put in for this event to go ahead. Guys, just give them a round of applause, yeah? These guys are putting so much work, all of them. And they've got even more things planned for you today. There's games, there's a few TikToks and stuff. You know, everybody better be following our socials. We're trying to get out there. Like Achin, Mad, and Appa said before, we're trying to make people know that we as a Sabah exist. Like, I can't lie, when I've been to uni, nobody knows about our Sabah, yeah? No one knows what Jacobite is. We need to make that a thing. We need to be like, show what our church is. We need to show them with what we do, our retreats, our camps, our churches, our Palli Kurbanas, our events. We need to show them as a youth that we're together. So that's what we're going to do, and that's what all of you need to be here for. And I want to see everyone participating in every event, all the elections, whether you're running for a position or just voting, everybody needs to participate. If you haven't got a unit in your own church, set it up. Take the initiative and set that church unit up, because you'll be able to do stuff in your own church and also participate in the UK event as a unit. It will make everybody more involved, everybody feel more included, and overall make JSOSM that much better, okay? So thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you to our committee. Thank you especially to Oxford Palli for doing so much for us today. As Achin said, They've sorted out with the food, with the venue. They've planned for weeks in advance for this event. Nothing would have been done without their help. Thank you to MSOC Media, especially Glenn and his father here. They've done so much with the live stream, the recording. We've got the MSOC Media team of Angel Chechi taking photos. We've got our social media team getting, as I said, the TikToks ready. Everybody's done so much. And especially a big thank you to Dr. Sebastian Brock, who's come here for the talk and provided us with such an interesting experience today on our Syriac Sabbath. But yeah, that's all I need to say. Thank you, guys.
Before you go, okay, let me make a point. What is your objectives? What are the student movement's objectives?
So, as the objectives is, firstly, for everyone to get more involved with church. Like, I know when you're like at home before uni, a lot of people might just go funny because their family is. And I feel like a lot of people, when they go to uni, just stop going to church, certain people. So, like, wherever you go, we have I think we have over 40 churches now. So wherever you go for uni, I can't lie, there's no excuse. Yeah? Like, there is a palli for everyone to go to everywhere, yeah? Like, I'm in Birmingham. I've got 2 churches, maybe even 3 that I could go to. So there's no excuse for anyone.
Okay.
Yeah?
So that is number 1 priority is one objective is the regular attendance, church attendance. Okay. The second objective
is regular and consistent approach of initiative in our JSOSM. So people to step forward, even if it's not in our national JSOSM, in their own church, to step forward with events and taking part in our competitions.
So that is the active participation. That is the second objective. The third one should be, what you've done today is a camp or one-day camp or one-day learning event. So you should have a learning objective. So it's very important at this stage you should learn. So your objective is learning should be one among them. So that 3 objectives, you will have some rules and regulations. You will prepare it with a Lilu Achan. So before the next GB, you will circulate among yourselves and make it as a not that formal, but some kind of informal. Then make an objectives. This is our aim and motto. This is how we do. And you have a plan for it. So if you have a summer camp, but however, if you want to, നമ്മുടെ ലെൻറ്റ് വരികയാണ് വലിയ ലെൻറ്റ് നോമ്പ് ഈ ലെൻറ്റിൽ you can do some online prayer or online learning or online something. This is a face-to-face, then one online, then the third one should be face-to-face again. That should be in a year 3 events, at least 2 face-to-face and 1 online event. Not the GB online, learning something, prayer together, something like that's an online event. That also you need to. So consult with your Lilu Achan. Thank you, Nohan. Thank you very much. Thank you, committee, for everything. Andrea was going to say something.
Okay. So I just wanted to thank everyone who came today. The only reason why JSOSM works is because you guys attend everything we do. You're very interactive. We're only hosting these events for you. And we're so thankful for all of you for coming. I also want to thank His Grace Isaac Morostatios Tidimini, because at family conference, he approached us and actually proposed us with his idea to host this one-day talk. He told us about Dr. Brock and he told us to get in contact with him. So we want to thank you as well, Dr. Brock, for coming in today. Please, I just want to say just my part and my experience on being on committee. So it's coming to about a year now since we formed this committee. Although it was supposed to be a very informal committee, we were supposed to be a temporary committee. I'm so proud of everything that we've done so far. And I hope it just inspires you to run for those committee roles when we do have that general body meeting. So please get active, and we'd love to see you on committee.
The next one is a game session.
Yeah, so is everyone...
תשובתו לעלו במרומי all'arabo shlomo shaino sabro tobo labnaino sho കന്യകമറിയാമിന്നാം പെറ്റാളും നിയമകുടങ്ങളെ മുടയും നോനെ സിയോനിതു കേട്ടപ്പോ അവനെ കണ്ടിടും മുമ്പേ കമ്പം പൂണ്ടു നിബിമൊഴിവായി ചേരോദേ സോഴാൻ വേഗലഹേമിൽ നൃപതി ജനിച്ചെന്നാൾ കൊല്ലിച്ചാലാൾ വിട്ടാം വേഗലഹേം ശിശുവൃന്ദത്തെ വീഴ്ചയിലായി തൻ വാഴ്ച പാടാനീശോ എന്നെന്നും വരുവിൻ സ്തുതി പാടിടാം നിജജനനത്തിൻ ദിവസത്തിൽ ഹാലേലുയ്യ ഹാലേലുയ്യ ബാരക്കുമോ തന്നിൽ മുതിർന്നോനെ അമ്മണിയുണ്ടേ ജനകനു സമനല്ലോ പിഞ്ചു കിടാവെന്നോണം ഉൾക്കൂട്ടിൽ പാൽ നുകരുന്നു മാലാഖമാർ ചൂടുന്നു ഇടയന്മാരും ശാസ്ത്രികളും കാണിക്കകളർപ്പിച്ചു രാജാധീശക്കെന്ന വിധം ഹാലേലുയ്യ ഹാലേലുയ്യ. توكل كن عمي فيك اسمعوا لك شبهته